Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to meet you again in today's story. Ladies and gentlemen on the channel, Darkness Prevails would like to send you a story. Now we are honored to invite you to listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we delve into the shadowy corners of ancient Greece, where the Mediterranean sun casts long, deceptive shadows over secrets that have been buried for millennia. Imagine dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering into a forgotten temple. The air thick with the scent of old incense and something else, something unsettling. You can almost hear the whisper of ancient chants, the rustle of priestly robes, and the unsettling feeling that you're not entirely alone. We're peeling back the layers of myth and legend, peering into the darkness where some truths were perhaps meant to stay hidden. And let's be honest, if you were actually there trying to uncover these secrets in ancient times, you probably wouldn't survive this. Or at least, you'd end up as a very confused goat in a philosopher's anecdote. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our first stop on this rather unsettling tour takes us high up the craggy, sun-baked slopes of Mount Parnassus. You feel the thinness of the air, the way the wind whispers secrets through the gnarled olive trees. For centuries, this was the most sacred place in the ancient Greek world, the home of the Oracle of Delphi. Kings and commoners alike would make the arduous pilgrimage here, their hearts heavy with questions, their pockets hopefully heavy with offerings. You can almost picture yourself among them, your sandals kicking up dust on the winding path, the sheer cliffs towering above, creating a sense of awe and perhaps a little trepidation. The air itself feels charged, different from the bustling marketplaces or the quiet olive groves you left behind. This is a place of power, a place where the veil between worlds feels perilously thin. As you round a bend, the sanctuary of Apollo comes into view, a sprawling complex of temples, treasuries, and statues clinging to the mountainside. It's an impressive sight, even in its ruined state today, but imagine it in its heyday, gleaming marble, vibrant paint, the smoke of sacrifices curling into the sky. At its heart lies the temple of Apollo, and within that temple, the Adyton, the forbidden inner sanctum where the magic, or perhaps the chemistry, happened. This wasn't a place you could just wander into, mind you. Access was strictly controlled by a retinue of priests, a whole bureaucracy of divine communication. And at the very center of it all was the Pythia, the oracle herself. She wasn't a deity, but a mortal woman, chosen to be Apollo's mouthpiece. Originally, they say, she was a young virgin, pure and untainted. A rather charming, if slightly creepy, idea. However, a quirky historical tidbit for you. After an incident where one of these young Pythias was reportedly abducted, details are, as always, conveniently murky. The rules changed. The oracle then had to be a woman over 50, though she was still required to dress in the guise of a maiden. Make of that what you will, perhaps a nod to tradition, or maybe just an ancient HR policy update. She would sit on a golden tripod, an ornate three-legged stool, positioned directly over a chasm in the earth. Below her, the source of her divine inspiration, or so the story goes. For centuries, the secret of Delphi's power was attributed to mysterious fumes, the pneuma, wafting from this chasm. Ancient writers spoke of sweet-smelling vapors, of laurel leaves being chewed or burned, of water from the sacred Castalian spring. The Pythia would inhale these, fall into a trance, and then utter prophecies. Gibberish, mostly. Ecstatic ravings, poetic fragments, pronouncements so ambiguous they could mean almost anything. The priests, bless their toga-loving hearts, would then interpret these divine ramblings, which conveniently often supported the political agenda of whoever paid the most or offered the plumpest sacrificial goat. Talk about job security through creative translation. You can almost hear the hushed whispers as supplicants waited, palms sweating, for these carefully curated words of fate. But what were these fumes? For a long time, modern scholars dismissed the idea of actual psychoactive gases, thinking it was all just religious theater, mass hysteria, or the power of suggestion. Delphi, after all, was considered the omphalos, the navel of the world, a literal stone marking the planet's center, a mainstream historical fact that cemented its profound psychological and spiritual importance to the Greeks. Surely such a significant site didn't rely on, well, getting high. Then, in the late 1990s, a team of geologists, archaeologists, and chemists took a closer look. They discovered something fascinating. Two geological fault lines, the Kurna and Delphi faults, intersecting directly beneath the Temple of Apollo. And these faults, they found, could have released light hydrocarbon gases, specifically ethylene. Now, ethylene in small concentrations can induce a trance-like state, a feeling of euphoria, out-of-body sensations, and even garbled speech. Suddenly, the ancient accounts didn't seem so far-fetched. The sweet smell. Ethylene has a faintly sweet odor. The Pythia's delirium? A classic symptom. Imagine the health and safety briefings for the Pythia, right? So you'll be sitting over a crack in the earth, inhaling unknown psychoactive gases for hours. Any questions? No? Great. Next. It paints a rather different picture of divine inspiration. This discovery reignited the debate. Could this be the terrifying secret of Delphi? That its profound spiritual authority, its ability to sway empires and decide the fates of men, rested not on a god's voice, but on a geological anomaly, a natural gas leak? It's a compelling theory, and one that many find convincing. You can imagine the ancient priests, perhaps not fully understanding the science, but definitely understanding the effect, and guarding this knowledge jealously. It was their power, their influence. However, the story isn't quite closed. Scholars still debate whether the primary psychoactive agent was ethylene, other gases from the Kurna fault line, or if the elaborate rituals, the fasting, the intense psychological expectation, and the sheer awe-inspiring setting played an even larger role in the Pythia's trance. Was it the gas, or the whole, carefully constructed Delphic experience? Perhaps it was a potent cocktail of both. Plutarch, who himself served as a priest at Delphi in the late 1st and early 2nd century AD, even wrote about the decline of the oracle's potency, noting that the fumes seemed weaker in his time, prophecies less frequent and less clear. Maybe the gas leak was slowly, running out of gas. Trying to get a straight answer from the oracle was probably like trying to get your Wi-Fi router to work after a thunderstorm. Lots of cryptic signals, and you mostly end up guessing what it all means. The pronouncements were famously opaque. When King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should attack Persia, the oracle replied, "If you cross the Halys River, you will destroy a great empire." He crossed, attacked, and the great empire he destroyed was his own. Technically, the oracle wasn't wrong, was she? That's the kind of careful ambiguity that keeps you in business for centuries. So, as you imagine yourself leaving Delphi, the pronouncements of the oracle echoing in your mind, you're left to wonder. Was it divine will, geological chance, or clever human manipulation? The Greeks themselves seemed to believe in its divine power, and for centuries, that belief shaped their world. The fumes may have dissipated, the temple may lie in ruins, but the unsettling enigma of what truly happened in that smoky chamber on Mount Parnassus, that's a secret that still whispers on a wind. From the windswept heights of Delphi, where ambiguous futures were bought and sold, our path now descends, leading us west towards the coast of Attica, not far from Athens. The air grows a little warmer, a little heavier, carrying the scent of the sea and something else, something earthy, ancient, and deeply secretive. You trade the stark, sun-drenched pronouncements of Apollo for the twilight whispers of Demeter and Persephone, goddesses whose story forms the very heart of our next unsolved mystery. You can almost feel the shift in atmosphere, a subtle change from the intellectual sparring with fate to a more visceral, emotional quest for meaning. We arrive at Eleusis, a name that even now hums with a kind of hushed reverence and a definite members-only vibe. For nearly 2,000 years, from around 1500 BCE until the late 4th century CE, when the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, a real party pooper for pretty much all pagan traditions, ordered the sanctuaries closed and the rites to cease, the Eleusinian mysteries were celebrated here. That's an incredibly long run for any religious festival. Think about it, 2 millennia of keeping the same secrets. Your average streaming service can't even keep a show running for 5 seasons, let alone 2,000 years. This extraordinary longevity is a mainstream historical fact that underscores their immense importance to generations of Greeks and later Romans. Unlike the often gloomy and rather unappealing afterlife depicted in much of Greek mythology, a shadowy, flitting existence in Hades, like being stuck in a universe's most oppressing waiting room, the Eleusinian mysteries offered something profoundly different, a promise of a blessed afterlife, a comforting assurance in the face of mortality. This wasn't about predicting your next business venture or whether your olive harvest would be bountiful. This was about your soul's eternal destiny, about finding peace beyond the veil of death. No wonder people were, quite literally, dying to get in, or rather, clamoring to get initiated before they died. But what actually happened at Eleusis? Well, that's where things get deliciously, frustratingly obscure. The initiates, known as Mistai, were sworn to absolute secrecy on pain of death. And they weren't kidding. Reveal the secrets, and you weren't just getting uninvited from next year's ceremony. You were looking at a swift and very public execution, or at the very least, severe legal and social repercussions. This oath of silence was so effective that, to this day, the precise details of the central rituals remain one of history's best-kept secrets. It's like the ultimate ancient non-disclosure agreement, enforced with more than just a strongly worded letter from a lawyer. Imagine yourself joining the great procession from Athens to Eleusis. It's a walk of about 14 miles along the sacred way, but it's no solemn, silent trudge. It's a vibrant, noisy affair, the road thronged with thousands of people, men, women, even slaves who had their master's permission, a surprisingly inclusive policy for ancient Greece, though permission is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. You carry torches, there's chanting, ritualistic jesting, and taunting at certain points, particularly at a bridge over the Cephisos River. This was known as the Gepharismus, where masked figures would hurl mock insults and crude jokes at the pilgrims, supposedly to ward off evil spirits or perhaps just to lighten the mood. An ancient roast, if you will, though probably less about celebrity egos and more about communal catharsis. You can feel the anticipation building, the shared sense of purpose, the slight nervous flutter in your stomach as you approach the sanctuary, the dust of the road clinging to your robe. Eleusis itself was dominated by the Telesterion, the great initiation hall. This wasn't your average open-air temple with graceful columns. It was a massive, dimly lit, hypostyle hall, its roof supported by a forest of interior columns, capable of holding thousands of initiates at once. Picture walking into this vast, shadowy space, the air thick with incense and the scent of countless bodies, the only light perhaps from flickering torches held by priests, casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. The sheer scale and the oppressive darkness, after the bright Mediterranean sun, would be overwhelming, designed to disorient and heighten the senses. The mysteries revolved around the poignant myth of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, the harvest, and fertility, and her beloved daughter Persephone. As the story goes, Hades, the rather gloomy king of the underworld, feeling a bit lonely down there in his subterranean kingdom, it's hard to meet people when your job is ruling the dead, abducted Persephone to be his queen while she was picking flowers. Demeter, utterly grief-stricken and enraged, searched the earth for her daughter. In her sorrow and anger, she neglected her divine duties, causing the crops to fail, the earth to become barren, and bringing famine to the world. Zeus, king of the gods, seeing that humanity was about to starve, and presumably stop making sacrifices, which is always bad for divine business, finally intervened. A deal was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld, symbolizing winter when the earth is barren, and part of the year with her mother on earth, symbolizing spring and summer when life returns and the crops flourish. This powerful cycle of descent, loss, search, and joyous reunion, of death and rebirth, formed the symbolic and emotional core of mysteries. The initiation itself took place over several days, possibly up to 9, involving fasting, purification rites in the sea, sacrifices, and dramatic enactments of the Demeter and Persephone myth. What do the initiates actually see and do inside the telesterion during the final, most sacred part of the ritual? Here, we enter the realm of educated guesswork and tantalizing fragments gleaned from ancient writers who dare to allude to the experience without explicitly breaking their vows. They spoke of things done, dramina, things said, legomena, and most importantly, things shown, deichnomena. The things shown seem to have been the climax, a profound visionary experience, perhaps involving sacred objects revealed in a sudden, blinding blaze of light after a period of intense darkness and anticipation. Can you imagine the psychological impact? Hours, maybe days, spent in ritual preparation, fasting to purify the body and mind, then plunged into near total darkness, your senses heightened, your emotions raw, and then a sudden, overwhelming revelation. It must have been incredibly powerful, transformative even. Before this final revelation, initiates drank a special ritual brew called Kikian. Its precise ingredients are a subject of intense scholarly debate. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, one of our earliest sources, mentions barley, water, and pennyroyal, a type of mint. But many scholars suspect there was something more, a psychoactive ingredient that could have facilitated or enhanced the visionary experiences. Ergot, a fungus that can grow on barley and rye, contains lysergic acid alkaloids, chemically similar to LSD, and is a popular candidate. Do the priests of Eleusis deliberately cultivate or allow ergot-infected barley for the Kikian, harnessing its mind-altering properties? Or was the profound effect simply the result of the power of suggestion, the fasting, the darkness, the chanting, the heightened emotional state, and the intense desire to believe? Perhaps it was a bit of column A and a bit of column B. Remember those Delphic fumes we talked about? The ancient Greeks, it seems, weren't entirely averse to using what nature provided to achieve altered states of consciousness in their religious practices. A quirky tidbit for you. Many prominent figures throughout Greek and Roman history were initiates, including philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides, and even Roman emperors like Augustus, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. These weren't just gullible peasants. These were some of the most brilliant and influential minds of antiquity, all seeking something in that shadowy hall. Historians still argue whether the apoptia, the final beholding or revelation, involve a literal reenactment of Persephone's return from the underworld, a symbolic display of agricultural fertility, like an ear of grain reaped in perfect silence, as some early Christian writers contemptuously hinted, or a more abstract, deeply personal mystical experience that transcended simple representation. Cicero, the Roman statesman and an initiate himself, wrote that at Eleusis, we have learned from them the beginnings of life and have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with a better hope. That's a pretty strong endorsement, suggesting a profound spiritual impact. It wasn't just about ensuring a good harvest next season. It was about fundamentally changing one's relationship with death itself. Imagine emerging from the telesterion, blinking in the daylight, or perhaps starlight, as the final rites may have occurred at night, the secrets of Demeter and Persephone locked within you. You'd carry that experience, that vision, that feeling for the rest of your life. The world might look different. The promise of a blessed afterlife, a feeling of connection to the divine cycle of death and rebirth, would be a profound comfort in a world often filled with uncertainty and fear. You'd feel part of an exclusive, initiated community, bonded by a shared, ineffable experience. No wonder they kept quiet. You wouldn't want to cheapen something so profound, so personal, by blabbing about it over olives and watered-down wine at the local taverna. It's like trying to explain a truly epic concert or a life-changing epiphany to someone who wasn't there. You just had to be there, man. Except, with more ancient goddesses as sacred relics and fewer guitar solos, probably. The silence of Eleusis is almost as powerful and enduring as the cryptic pronouncements of Delphi. While Delphi offered guidance, however ambiguous, for this life, Eleusis offered tangible hope for the next. The exact nature of that hope, the specifics of the rituals that engendered it, remained shrouded by the initiate's solemn vows. The fear of divine retribution, or perhaps more simply, a profound respect for the sacredness of their experience, ensure that the heart of the Eleusinian mysteries remains an unsolved secret, a tantalizing glimpse into the ancient Greek soul's deepest yearnings for meaning and immortality. You're left standing outside the ruined Telesterion today, the wind rustling through the tall grass that now covers much of the sacred precinct, and you can almost hear the echoes of ancient chants, the hushed awe of the thousands who passed through its gates, carrying a secret they dutifully and successfully took to their graves. Leaving behind the profound, earthy secrets of Eleusis, we now find ourselves adrift, not on a physical journey across land, but plunging into the cool, dark depths of the Aegean Sea. The silence here is different, a muffled, underwater hush, broken only by the gentle creak of your imaginary submersible's hull as you descend. Below you, somewhere between the island of Crete and the Peloponnesian Peninsula, near the tiny, wind-swept island of Antikythera, lies the wreck of an ancient Roman-era cargo ship. You're looking for something that, by all rights, shouldn't exist. Imagine the scene. Around the year 1900, Greek sponge divers, seeking their livelihoods in the traditional, perilous way, stumble upon the shipwreck. They bring up statues, pottery, glassware, the usual treasures from a sunken vessel of that period. But then, amidst the encrusted amphory and corroded bronze, they find a lump. A heavily concreted, unassuming lump of bronze, about the size of a large dictionary, which, once it began to break apart, revealed something utterly astonishing. This is the Antikythera mechanism, and it's a discovery that has baffled and amazed scholars for over a century. You can almost feel the divers' confusion, then the dawning realization among archaeologists that this wasn't just another piece of scrap metal. This was something different, something impossibly sophisticated. You picture the painstaking work of conservators, carefully cleaning away centuries of marine growth, revealing intricate gears, dials, and tiny Greek inscriptions. It's like finding a smartphone in a medieval castle. The mainstream historical fact here is that the shipwreck itself has been dated to the first half of the 1st century BC, likely around 70 to 60 BCE. The ship was probably Roman, carrying a rich cargo of Greek treasures, possibly looted or being transported to Rome for a wealthy patron. The mechanism, however, is believed to be Greek in origin, likely constructed sometime in the late 2nd century BCE, maybe even earlier, perhaps around 150 to 100 BCE, making it at least a few decades old when the ship met its unfortunate end. Its complexity for that era is simply mind-boggling. We're talking about a device with at least 30 and possibly as many as 72 precisely engineered bronze gears, interconnected in a complex system housed within a wooden case that has long since rotted away. Nothing even remotely approaching this level of intricate gearwork would be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years, not until the development of sophisticated astronomical clocks in the 14th century. Think about that, a technological leap that then seemingly vanishes, only to be reinvented a millennium later. It's enough to make your historical eyebrows shoot right up into your hairline. So, what was this ancient computer designed to do? Through decades of painstaking research, including advanced X-ray tomography and surface imaging techniques, Because you can't just pry apart something this precious and delicate, scientists have pieced together much of its function. It wasn't a navigation device for the ship itself, as some initially speculated. Instead, it was an incredibly sophisticated astronomical calculator, a mechanical cosmos. You can imagine a learned Greek philosopher or astronomer, perhaps in Rhodes or Syracuse, places known for their astronomical and engineering prowess, turning its hand crank. As they did, the gears would whir and pointers on the front and back dials would move, tracking the positions of the sun and moon through the zodiac, predicting eclipses, both solar and lunar, with surprising accuracy, and even modeling the irregular orbit of the moon using a clever system of epicyclic gearing, a kind of gear riding on another gear to mimic the moon's varying speed. That latter feature, modeling the moon's first anomaly, its elliptical path, is particularly astounding, using a pin and slot mechanism to vary the lunar gear's rotation. It's the kind of mechanical ingenuity that feels centuries ahead of its time. You can almost hear the soft click and whir of those ancient gears, a sound lost to the sea for 2 millennia. But the Antikythera mechanism did more than just track celestial bodies. It also displayed the timing of significant Panhellenic athletic events, like the Olympic Games, the Pythian Games, remember Delphi, the Isthmian Games, and the Nemean Games on a 4-year cycle. So it wasn't just for egghead astronomers, it was also a kind of ancient sporting calendar. Honey, when are the next Olympics? Oh, let me just check the old cosmic doom predictor and sports almanac. A quirky tidbit for you. One of the dials, the Metonic dial, displayed a 235 lunar month cycle, about 19 years, that reconciles solar and lunar calendars. This was crucial for setting festival dates and agricultural schedules. Another spiral dial, the Saros dial, predicted eclipses over an 18-year, 11-day, 8-hour period. It even had a little spherical display for the phase of the moon. The level of detail and astronomical knowledge embedded in this compact device is simply staggering. The terrifying secret, or perhaps more accurately, the profound unsolved mystery, isn't just what it did, but how they did it, and why this incredible technology seems to have largely vanished from the historical record. Where are the schematics? The instruction manuals? The other, perhaps less complex, precursor devices that must have existed? Historians still argue whether the Antikythera mechanism was a unique masterpiece, a singular creation of a forgotten genius, or if it represents the tip of a technological iceberg, a more common tradition of complex gear devices in the Hellenistic world, most of which have simply been lost to time, melted down for their bronze, or are still waiting to be discovered. If such advanced mechanical knowledge was present, why didn't it lead to other technological revolutions? Why the apparent 1,000-year gap in comparable clockwork technology? It's like the ancient Greeks invented the steam engine and then mostly used it to make novelty whistling toys, as Hero of Alexandria, who lived a couple of centuries after the mechanism was built, seemingly did with his Yalopile. You're left to ponder the implications. Did this knowledge retreat into secretive philosophical schools, deemed too powerful or too esoteric for wider dissemination? Was it lost in the social and political upheavals that rocked the Mediterranean world, like the Roman conquest or the later decline of the Western Roman Empire? Imagine a workshop, perhaps in Rhodes, where artisans and astronomers collaborated, their knowledge passed down from master to apprentice. What happened to these workshops? Were their secrets jealously guarded, or simply not valued enough by subsequent generations who had, shall we say, more pressing concerns like barbarian invasions or figuring out how to make a decent aqueduct that didn't leak? The Romans were good at that, at least. The inscriptions on the mechanism are in Koine Greek and are essentially an instruction manual and astronomical labels. They describe what the user is seeing and what the device predicts. But they don't tell us who made it or precisely where. Cicero, in the 1st century BCE, mentions 2 such devices built by Archimedes in the 3rd century BCE that were brought to Rome. Could the Antikythera mechanism be in that tradition, perhaps inspired by Archimedes' work? Archimedes, after all, was a legendary mathematician, physicist, engineer, inventor, and astronomer. If anyone could have conceived of such a device, it was him. He was famously killed by a Roman soldier during the siege of Syracuse. Maybe he took some crucial gear-cutting secrets with him to the grave, like a particularly stubborn engineer refusing to share his source code. "Don't disturb my circles," he supposedly snapped, before being rudely interrupted by a Roman sword. The existence of the Antikythera mechanism challenges our neat, linear perceptions of historical technological development. It suggests that the ancient world, or at least pockets of it, possessed a far greater understanding of mechanics and astronomy than we often give them credit for. It's a tangible piece of lost high technology, a silent testament to forgotten ingenuity. You can almost feel the ghost of its creator, an ancient Greek Da Vinci perhaps, meticulously crafting each tiny gear, driven by a passion to understand and model the cosmos. What other wonders do they create that now lie corroded on the seabed, or buried beneath centuries of accumulated earth, their secrets still waiting for some lucky sponge diver or archaeologist to bring them back into the light? The Antikythera mechanism whispers of a world more complex, more advanced in certain respects than we've traditionally imagined, and the full extent of that lost knowledge remains one of archaeology's most tantalizing and unsolved puzzles. You're left looking at the murky water, wondering what else lies beneath the waves, what other pieces of a forgotten, highly advanced past are just waiting to rewrite our understanding of ancient capabilities. We resurface from the Aegean depths, shaking off the chill of sunken mysteries, and find ourselves drawn to the sun-drenched, wind-swept shores of Crete, the largest of the Greek islands. The air here is scented with wild thyme and the sea, and the landscape is rugged, dominated by mountains that seem to hold ancient secrets within their stony embrace. You can feel a palpable sense of deep history here, a connection to a civilization even older than the classical Greece we often picture. Our destination is Knossos, the grandest of the Minoan palace complexes, a sprawling labyrinth of rooms, corridors, and courtyards that whispers of a sophisticated and enigmatic Bronze Age culture that flourished here thousands of years ago, long before Athens or Sparta rose to prominence. Knossos, with its vibrant, restored frescoes of leaping dolphins, graceful bull leapers, and enigmatic priestesses, is a mainstream historical fact, a cornerstone of Minoan archaeology. Excavated and controversially reconstituted by Sir Arthur Evans in the early 20th century, it offers a vivid, if somewhat romanticized, glimpse into this ancient world. But beneath the colorful restorations and the scholarly interpretations, a darker, more terrifying legend lurks, the tale of King Minos, his unnatural offspring, and the monstrous secret hidden at the heart of a cleverly designed prison, the labyrinth, and its fearsome occupant, the Minotaur. You can almost hear the distant echo of a monstrous roar, feel the oppressive weight of a divine curse hanging over the sun-bleached stones. The myth is one of the most famous and unsettling from Greek mythology. King Minos of Crete, so the story goes, angered the sea god Poseidon by failing to sacrifice a magnificent white bull sent from the sea. Rule number 1 in ancient Greece: never stiff a god on a sacrifice, especially not Poseidon, and especially not with a prime bull. As punishment, Poseidon caused Minos's wife, Queen Pasiphae, to conceive an unnatural passion for the bull. Yes, you read that right. With the help of the master craftsman Daedalus, who, as we'll see, was quite the inventive, if morally flexible chap, she hid inside a wooden cow, and, well, nature, or rather unnatural nature, took its course. The result of this rather awkward union was the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, a monstrous hybrid with an insatiable appetite for human flesh. You can just imagine the awkward family dinners. "Honey, can you pass the—" "Oh, never mind," Asterian's eaten all the guests again. To contain this terrifying and deeply embarrassing family secret, King Minos commissioned the very same Daedalus, the guy who facilitated the problem in the first place, talk about enabling bad behavior, to construct an intricate maze beneath the palace of Knossos, the labyrinth. It was designed to be so complex that no one who entered could ever find their way out. And into this dark, twisting prison, the Minotaur was cast. But a monster needs to eat, and so, as a tribute, Minos demanded that Athens, which had been subjugated by Crete after a war, send 7 young men and 7 young women every 9 years, some versions say every year, to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, to wander the labyrinth until they were hunted down and devoured. It's a horrifying story, a tale of divine retribution, monstrous birth, and innocent blood spilled in the darkness. You can almost picture those terrified Athenian youths, their faces pale with dread, being led into the gaping maw of the labyrinth. The utter despair, the disorientation as they stumbled through the endless, identical corridors, the sound of their own breathing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence, punctuated only by the distant, terrifying bellow of the approaching beast. It's pure nightmare fuel, the kind of story that would keep ancient Greek children, and probably few adults, awake at night. But is there any truth to it? Did a real labyrinth, a literal maze designed to imprison a monster, actually exist beneath Knossos? This is where the lines between myth, archaeology, and terrifying possibility begin to blur. The Palace of Knossos itself is incredibly complex. It's not a single unified building, but a sprawling agglomeration of over 1,300 rooms, interconnected by corridors, staircases, and light wells, all arranged around a large central courtyard. It's easy to see how its bewildering layout, with its dead ends, its winding passages, and its multiple levels, could have been described as labyrinthine even without a bull-headed monster in residence. Sir Arthur Evans himself, when he excavated it, was struck by its maze-like quality and believed he had found the very labyrinth of legend. He even adopted the labrys, the double-headed axe, a common symbol found throughout Knossos, as a key motif in his reconstructions, believing it was linked to the labyrinth's name. This complex, confusing structure of Knossos is the basis for much of the speculation. However, there's no definitive archaeological evidence of a purpose-built, inescapable maze designed to imprison a specific creature, nor, perhaps unsurprisingly, any Minotaur skeletons with a taste for Athenian youths. So, what could have inspired the myth? Historians still argue whether the labyrinth story is a purely symbolic one, a garbled folk memory of Cretan power and Athenian subjugation, or if it contains a kernel of historical truth, perhaps heavily distorted over time. One intriguing possibility relates to the Minoan fascination with bulls. Bulls feature prominently in Minoan art. Frescoes show them in procession, in hunting scenes, and most famously, in the dangerous sport of bull leaping, where acrobats, both male and female, it seems, would grasp the horns of a charging bull and vault over its back. It was clearly a ritualistic and highly significant activity. Could the Minotaur be a symbolic representation of this powerful, untamed bull cult, or perhaps a priestly figure wearing a bull mask during sacred rituals? Imagine a ceremony deep within the palace, in a darkened, restricted area, where such rituals took place. To an outsider, or to a captive from a rival culture, these rites might have seemed terrifying, monstrous even. Perhaps the devouring was symbolic, representing initiation into these cults, or a more literal, grim sacrifice, though clear evidence for human sacrifice in Minoan Crete is still debated and quite sparse, unlike, say, with the Aztecs. Another theory focuses on the very structure of Knossos. The complex included extensive basement storage areas, dark, cool magazines filled with giant pithoi jars for storing oil, wine, and grain. These subterranean, labyrinthine storerooms, rarely seen by outsiders, could have contributed to the legend. Imagine being a captive, led through these dimly lit, confusing passages. It would certainly feel like being trapped in a maze. A quirky tidbit for you, the word labyrinth itself might not originally have meant maze. Some scholars suggest it's related to the Lydian word labris, meaning double axe, a sacred symbol often found carved on the stones of Knossos. So labyrinthos could have originally meant house of the double axe, referring to the palace itself, which later, due to its complex plan, acquired the secondary meaning of mace. It's a linguistic twist that could reframe the whole story. And what about Daedalus, the master craftsman? He's a fascinating figure, a kind of ancient mad scientist or ethically challenged engineer. Not only did he design the labyrinth and the wooden cow, let's not forget that masterpiece of questionable judgment, but he also famously crafted wings of feathers and wax for himself and his son Icarus to escape from Crete after King Minos, understandably annoyed about the whole helping my wife mate with a bull and then helping the hero kill the result thing, imprison him. The tragic story of Icarus flying too close to the sun is a cautionary tale about hubris, but Daedalus himself successfully escaped. He represents human ingenuity, the power to create wonders, but also the potential for that ingenuity to be used for dark or destructive purposes. You could almost say he's the patron saint of people who build things without fully considering the user agreement or the potential for catastrophic misuse. Sure, I can build you an inescapable monster prison. What could possibly go wrong? The hero Theseus, of course, is the one who eventually volunteers as a tribute, sails to Crete, and with the help of Minos's daughter, Ariadne, who clearly had a thing for doomed heroes and bad boys, successfully navigates the labyrinth, slays the Minotaur, and escapes, taking Ariadne with him, though he rather ungallantly abandons her on the island of Naxos later. But that's a story for another night of questionable heroics. Ariadne's help was crucial. She gave Theseus a ball of thread, or in some versions a glowing wreath, to unroll as he went in, so he could find his way back out. It's a simple solution to a complex problem, the kind of thing that makes you wonder why no one thought of it in the previous 9 cycles of Athenian youth delivery. Maybe they just weren't as good at forward planning or didn't have a friendly princess on their side. So, as you wander the reconstructed ruins of Knossos today, the Cretan sun beating down, the wind whistling through the ancient stones, you're left with a sense of unease. Was it all just a myth, a fantastical story to explain the power of Minoan Crete and its eventual decline? Or does the sprawling complexity of the palace itself, the pervasive bull imagery, the hints of dark rituals and hidden chambers, point to something more? The Minotaur might not have been a literal half-man, half-bull, but the fear he represented, the idea of a monstrous secret hidden in the heart of power, of innocence sacrificed in darkness, that feeling is potent. The labyrinth of Knossos, whether a physical maze or a symbolic one woven from fear and awe, remains a terrifying Greek secret, its true nature still lost in the winding corridors of time, daring you to find the thread that leads to the truth. You can almost feel the ground beneath your feet holding its breath, reluctant to give up the full story of what transpired in its depth. We leave the island of Crete, the faint scent of bull and ancient stone fading, and our journey takes us across the Mediterranean eastward towards the sun-scorched lands of Egypt. You can feel the air grow drier, the landscape shifting from island ruggedness to the vast, intimidating expanse of the desert. Here, under the relentless gaze of the Egyptian sun, another ancient mystery lies buried, not in the depths of a palace, but beneath the endless, shifting sands, the chilling story of Cambyses' lost army. This isn't a tale of mythical monsters or divine trickery, but a stark historical account of a military catastrophe so complete, so utterly baffling, that it has echoed down through millennia, leaving us to wonder what truly happened to 50,000 men. Our primary source for this unsettling event is the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, and occasionally the father of lies, depending on how much you trust his more colorful anecdotes. He wrote his histories in the 5th century BCE, about 75 years after the events he describes. According to Herodotus, in 525 or 524 BCE, Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus the Great and the Achaemenid Persian king, was campaigning in Egypt after conquering it. He was, by all accounts, a rather impetuous and perhaps even cruel ruler, prone to fits of rage and sacrilegious acts, like stabbing the sacred Apis bull. Remember our discussion about angering gods over bulls? Cambyses apparently didn't get that memo either. It seems like a recurring theme with powerful men and bovine divinities. After securing Egypt, Cambyses decided to launch a series of ambitious, some might say foolhardy military expeditions. One was against Carthage, which failed because his Phoenician allies, who formed the bulk of his fleet, refused to fight their kin. Another was a disastrous march south into Nubia, modern-day Sudan, against the Kingdom of Kush, where his army suffered terribly from famine and was forced to turn back after resorting to cannibalism, if Herodotus is to be believed. But it's the third expedition that concerns us, the one that simply vanished without a trace. You can almost picture the scene. Cambyses, perhaps fuming from his other setbacks, dispatching a significant portion of his forces from Thebes with orders to march across the western desert to the Siwa oasis. Their mission? To subdue the Ammonians who live there, and crucially, to destroy the Oracle of Ammonius, a powerful religious center that had apparently not given Cambyses the prophecies he wanted. You know how it is with oracles. If you don't like the message, sometimes you just want to shoot, or in this case, dismantle, the messenger. Herodotus tells us that an army of 50,000 men set out from Thebes. That's a substantial force, a mainstream historical fact regarding the reported size of the expedition, even if ancient numbers are often prone to exaggeration. They reportedly reached an oasis, possibly Kurga Oasis, which was known as the Island of the Blessed, about a 7-day march into the desert. And then nothing. They marched out from that oasis, heading towards Siwa, and were never seen again. Herodotus provides a chillingly brief, almost matter-of-fact explanation. As they were marching from this oasis through the sand, and were about midway between it and their destination, it is said that as they were at their breakfast, a wind from the south, strong and deadly, arose, and carrying with it vast columns of whirling sand, entirely covered up the troops and caused them wholly to disappear. In this way, according to the Ammonians themselves, this army perished. 50,000 men, their weapons, their supplies, their entire existence, swallowed by a sandstorm, wiped off the face of the earth. You can imagine the terror of those soldiers. One moment, they're eating their morning rations, the desert sun climbing in the sky, the vast emptiness stretching before them. The next, the horizon darkens, the wind howls like a demon, and a colossal wall of sand, a samum as these deadly desert storms are known, bears down on them. There would be no escape, no shelter. Just choking dust, blinding sand, the disorienting roar of the wind, and then suffocating burial. It's a terrifying image, a stark reminder of nature's overwhelming power, especially in one of Earth's most inhospitable environments. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient Egypt we might have joked about in another context? Probably wouldn't have helped much here. For centuries, Cambyses' lost army was relegated to the realm of legend, a dramatic story told by Herodotus, but with little to no physical proof. Many historians were skeptical. Could a sandstorm, however violent, really obliterate an entire army so completely that no trace remained? Or was Herodotus, perhaps relying on local Egyptian tales designed to discredit the Persian conqueror, exaggerating or even inventing the catastrophe? After all, an entire army vanishing is a pretty convenient way for Cambyses to save face after a failed military objective. Oh, them. A sandstorm. Yeah, massive sandstorm. Tragic, really. Nothing I could do. The desert itself, particularly the great sand sea of the western desert, is a formidable, shifting landscape. It's easy to imagine how it could swallow anything or anyone without a trace. For years, archaeologists and adventurers, lured by the romance and mystery of the Lost Legion, have searched for evidence, weapons, armor, bones, anything that might confirm Herodotus's account. Most found nothing but more sand. It's like looking for a specific grain of sand on a miles-long beach, only the beach is actively trying to bury you. Then, in recent decades, tantalizing, though still debated, clues have begun to emerge. In the 1990s, and more prominently in the 2000s, twin Italian Archaeologists Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione claim to have found evidence. They focused their search further west than previous expeditions, believing the army might have taken a different, more southerly route than traditionally assumed. They reported finding Persian-era artifacts, including bronze weapons, silver bracelets, an earring, and most chillingly, human remains scattered in a way that suggested a sudden, catastrophic event rather than a formal battlefield. They even found a natural rock shelter that could have offered temporary, but ultimately futile, refuge for some of the soldiers. A quirky tidbit for you. One of their most compelling, though still debated, finds was a mass grave containing hundreds of bones and Achaemenid period arrowheads. The Castiglione brothers hypothesized that the soldiers weren't all buried alive in one spot, but rather that the sandstorm struck them as they were spread out, perhaps taking shelter in various small groups, and that the main body of the army might still be buried deeper under the dunes. However, the archaeological community remains divided. Historians still argue whether these finds are definitively linked to Cambyses' lost army, or if they could be from other desert travelers, traders, or smaller military units lost at different times. The desert is an ancient thoroughfare and a graveyard for many. Proving a direct link to that specific 50,000-strong force from 524 BCE is incredibly difficult without more conclusive evidence, like a Persian eBay receipt for 50,000 standard-issue legionary kits, slightly sandy. The scale of the alleged disaster is one of the main sticking points. Could one storm really get all of them? Perhaps the army was already weakened by thirst and exhaustion, strung out over a large area, making them more vulnerable. Or maybe the number 50,000 was an exaggeration to begin with, making the complete disappearance of a smaller force more plausible. Some theories even suggest human treachery rather than, or in addition to, natural disaster. Were they betrayed by their desert guides? Led into an ambush by hostile desert tribes, who then used the sandstorm as cover or as a convenient scapegoat? Or did Cambyses himself, known for his cruelty and paranoia, somehow arrange for their demise if he suspected their loyalty or competence after the failures in Nubia and against Carthage? That last one seems a bit far-fetched even for a paranoid despot. 50,000 soldiers is a lot to just write off. The Siwa oasis itself, the army's intended destination, remained defiantly independent for a time. The Oracle of Ammonius there continued to be highly influential. In fact, centuries later, Alexander the Great would make his own famous pilgrimage across the desert to consult this very same oracle, which reportedly confirmed his divine parentage and his destiny to rule the world. Alexander, clearly, had better luck with desert crossings and oracular pronouncements than poor Cambyses. Maybe he had better weather forecasting, or just better karma. So, as you picture the vast, silent desert, the dunes stretching endlessly under a pitiless sky, you are left with a haunting image of those Persian soldiers. Did they meet their end in a cataclysmic natural event, a testament to the raw, untamable power of the desert? Or is there a more complex, perhaps even more sinister, human element to their disappearance? The sands of the Egyptian western desert are notoriously good at keeping secrets. The wind whispers across them, sometimes revealing a fragment of pottery, a shard of bone, before covering it again. Somewhere out there, perhaps, lies the final resting place of Cambyses' vanished legions, a terrifying testament to ambition clashing with the unforgiving reality of the ancient world. Their silence is a chilling reminder that sometimes, history simply swallows its victims whole, leaving behind only questions and the whisper of the wind. We retreat from the desolate sands of Egypt, the ghosts of Cambyses' lost army still whispering in the desert wind, and turn our attention to one of the most towering figures in all of ancient history, Alexander the Great. Our journey now takes us to Babylon in modern-day Iraq, a city of legendary opulence and ancient power, but in June of 323 BCE, it became the stage for a death that has puzzled historians for over 2 millennia. You can feel the oppressive heat of a Mesopotamian summer, the air thick with the scent of exotic spices, river water, and perhaps the subtle, undetectable aroma of treachery. Alexander, the young Macedonian king who had conquered most of the known world by the age of 32, a man who seemed invincible, lay dying. But of what? And why so suddenly? Alexander's conquests are, of course, a mainstream historical fact. From Greece and Egypt across Persia and into India, he carved out one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. He was a brilliant military strategist, charismatic leader, and by all accounts, a prodigious drinker. He survived countless battles, serious wounds, and treacherous plots. Yet, in the opulent palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, something brought this seemingly unstoppable force of nature to a painful, protracted, and ultimately fatal halt. You can almost picture the scene. The hushed corridors of the palace, anxious generals gathered, physicians bustling uselessly, and outside, an empire holding its breath. The man who believed himself a god, or at least a son of Zeus Ammon, remember that oracle at Siwa, was undeniably, irrevocably mortal. The official story, or at least the one pieced together from various ancient sources like Arrian, Plutarch, and Diodorus Siculus, who were writing centuries after the fact, relying on earlier, now-lost accounts, is that Alexander fell ill after a prolonged bout of feasting and heavy drinking. One evening, after attending a banquet hosted by his friend Medius of Larissa, he complained of a sharp pain, like being struck by a spear, after downing a large cup of unmixed wine, a rather potent brew, as the Greeks usually diluted their wine with water. He developed a fever, which worsened over the next 10 to 12 days. He suffered chills, sweats, exhaustion, and increasing weakness. He lost his ability to speak, though he remained conscious for much of his illness, even greeting his loyal Macedonian soldiers as they filed past his sickbed, a poignant and desperate farewell. Finally, on the 10th or 11th of June 323 BCE, Alexander the Great, conqueror of the world, died. He was just shy of his 33rd birthday. The symptoms, as described, have led to a host of medical theories over the centuries. Was it malaria, which was rampant in ancient Babylon? Typhoid fever from contaminated food or water? West Nile virus, transmitted by mosquitoes? Or perhaps acute pancreatitis, brought on by his heavy drinking? Alcohol poisoning itself? Some have even suggested Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that can cause paralysis. Each theory has its proponents and its detractors, its supporting details from the ancient accounts, and its inconsistencies. You can imagine modern doctors and historians poring over these ancient texts like medical detectives, trying to diagnose a patient who has been dead for over 2,300 years. It's the ultimate cold case. But amidst all these natural causes theories, a more sinister suspicion has always lingered, a terrifying secret that refuses to die. Was Alexander the Great murdered? Poisoned, not by chance or disease, but by human hand? The idea is certainly compelling. Alexander, for all his charisma, had made powerful enemies. He had ordered the executions of some of his own high-ranking Macedonian officers whom he suspected of treason. His relentless campaigning and his adoption of Persian customs had alienated some of his staunchly Macedonian veterans. His plans for further conquests into Arabia, perhaps even further west, were daunting to his exhausted and homesick army. And then there was the looming succession crisis. Alexander had no clear adult heir. His wife Roxana was pregnant, but the child's gender and survival was unknown. His vast empire was held together largely by his personal authority. With him gone, it was ripe for the picking, a prize to be fought over by his ambitious generals, the Dakai or successors. You can almost feel the tension in Babylon, the secret calculations, the shifting loyalties, the whispered conversations in shadowy corners as the king's life ebbed away. Who stood to gain most from his death? The primary suspect in many poison theories is Antipater, the powerful regent Alexander had left in charge of Macedon. Antipater had recently been summoned to Babylon by Alexander, possibly to answer charges of disloyalty or mismanagement. His position was precarious. According to some accounts, Antipater, fearing for his life, conspired with his son Cassander, who would later become king of Macedon and was notoriously cruel, even murdering Alexander's widow Roxana and young son Alexander IV, and another of his sons, Ialus, who happened to be Alexander's royal cupbearer. A cupbearer, of course, is perfectly placed to administer a subtle, slow-acting poison. It's almost too convenient, like something out of a poorly written historical drama, but in the cutthroat world of ancient power politics, truth could often be stranger and more brutal than fiction. You can imagine Ialus, his hand perhaps trembling slightly, offering that fateful cup of wine to the unsuspecting king. The poison itself is another subject of intense debate. Ancient sources mention various possibilities. One popular candidate, mentioned by some Roman-era writers, was water from the river Styx, not the mythical river of the underworld, but a real river in Arcadia, Greece, now called the Mavroneri, whose waters were said to be so deadly cold and corrosive that they could dissolve any vessel except one made from the hoof of a horse or mule. This sounds more like folklore than practical poison, but the symbolism is potent. A more plausible, though still debated, theory suggests hellebore, particularly white hellebore, Veratrum album. This plant contains toxic alkaloids that can cause symptoms somewhat consistent with those described in Alexander's illness, including nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and cardiac problems, potentially leading to a slow, agonizing death if administered in repeated small doses. Historians still argue whether the described symptoms and the time frame of Alexander's illness truly match hellebore poisoning or any other specific poison known in antiquity with perfect accuracy. The ancient accounts are themselves sometimes contradictory or vague on crucial details. A quirky tidbit for you. One modern theory, proposed by Dr. Leo Skep from New Zealand's National Poison Centre, suggests that Alexander might have been poisoned by wine made from Veratrum album that was deliberately fermented to be toxic. He argues that other commonly suggested poisons like arsenic or strychnine would have killed much faster or produced more obvious immediate symptoms that the ancient chroniclers, familiar with such poisons, would have recognized and noted. The slow, progressive nature of Alexander's illness, Skep suggests, fits better with something like Veratrum. It's a fascinating hypothesis, trying to reverse engineer an ancient murder weapon. Of course, proving poison after more than 2 millennia without a body to examine, Alexander's tomb, though once a wonder of the ancient world in Alexandria, Egypt, has long been lost, another tantalizing unsolved mystery for another night perhaps, is virtually impossible. We are left to sift through the circumstantial evidence, the motives, the rumors that swirled even in antiquity. Plutarch himself notes that many believed Alexander was poisoned, though he seems to lean towards illness. The fact that Alexander's body reportedly showed no signs of decomposition for several days after his death, even in the Babylonian heat, has been cited by some as evidence of poisoning. Certain toxins might inhibit decay, while others attribute it to misdiagnosis of death. Perhaps he was in a deep coma and only appeared dead, or the accounts of no decay are simply legendary embellishments. You can almost hear the whispers starting, even as his body lay in state. He doesn't decay. It must be poison, or perhaps he truly was a god. The truth is, we will probably never know for certain whether Alexander the Great died of a fever, a surfeit of wine, or a carefully administered toxin in that fateful cup. The secret of his final days, the true cause of his demise, remains locked in the past, obscured by the passage of time, the biases of ancient historians, and the swirling ambitions of those who surrounded him. His death plunged his vast empire into decades of bloody civil war, as his generals fought like wolves over the spoils. Perhaps that chaotic aftermath is itself the most compelling argument for murder. Someone, or some faction, clearly wanted the king out of the way to unleash their own ambitions. You're left looking at the image of this young, world-conquering hero, struck down in his prime, and the terrifying possibility that his greatest triumph, the creation of his empire, also sowed the seeds of his own destruction, perhaps delivered with a smile by a trusted hand holding a poisoned chalice. Stepping away from the fevered deathbed of Alexander in Babylon, we journey backward in time, not just by centuries, but by nearly a millennium, to an era of even greater upheaval and more. Enigmatic shadows, the late Bronze Age, around the 12th century BCE. The Mediterranean world, which had been a glittering tapestry of powerful, interconnected civilizations, the Mycenaeans in Greece, think Agamemnon and the Trojan War heroes, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, the New Kingdom in Egypt, thriving city-states in Canaan and Cyprus, suddenly, catastrophically, began to unravel. You can feel a chilling wind blowing through the ruins of once mighty palaces, the scent of smoke and desolation hanging heavy in the air. And at the heart of this widespread collapse, or at least appearing as a dramatic symptom and accelerant of it, are mysterious, marauding groups known collectively and rather ominously as the Sea Peoples. Who were these Sea Peoples? That is the terrifying, unsolved secret that has haunted archaeologists and historians for generations. They appear in Egyptian records, most notably from the reigns of pharaohs Ramesses II, Merneptah, and Ramesses III, as a confederation of attackers who came from the sea, from the islands, or from the north. They weren't a single ethnic group, but rather a collection of different peoples, their names recorded by Egyptian scribes with a delightful, if frustrating, phonetic vagueness: the Peleset, the Checker, the Shikalesh, the Denyen, the Weshish, the Shardana, and others. You can almost picture the Egyptian scribes diligently trying to jot down these alien-sounding names, perhaps shrugging as they carve the hieroglyphs, thinking, close enough, I suppose. They're all just barbarians trying to wreck the place anyway. The mainstream historical fact is that the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE witnessed widespread destruction and abandonment of major sites across the Aegean, Anatolia, Cyprus, Syria, and Canaan. Mighty cities like Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos in Greece, Hattusa, the Hittite capital, Ugarit, a major port city in Syria, all fell, many of them violently burned and never reoccupied, or reoccupied only on a much smaller, impoverished scale. It was a period of systems collapse, a dark age, descending upon the eastern Mediterranean. Trade routes were disrupted, literacy declined as evidenced by the disappearance of writing systems like Linear B in Greece, which we'll touch upon later, and population shifted. And in the midst of this chaos, the Egyptian inscriptions and reliefs, particularly those at Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, depict desperate, large-scale battles against these invading seaborne and land-based forces. The Medinet Habu reliefs are dramatic and terrifying. They show chaotic naval battles, with Egyptian ships engaging enemy vessels crowded with feathered helmeted warriors. They depict land battles with ox carts carrying women and children, suggesting not just raiding parties, but entire populations on the move, a mass migration driven by desperation or conquest. The Sea Peoples are shown with distinctive attire and weaponry. The Peleset, often identified with the Philistines of biblical fame, who later settled on the coast of Canaan, with their famous feathered headdresses. The Shardana are depicted with horned helmets and round shields, sometimes serving as mercenaries for the Egyptians before appearing as enemies. It's like a casting call for an ancient epic, with each group having its own unique, intimidating costume. You can imagine the fear of the settled populations as these unfamiliar, fiercely clad warriors suddenly appeared on their shores or at their city gates. But where did they come from? This is the million drachma question. The Egyptian texts are frustratingly vague, referring to them as coming from their isles in the midst of the sea or from the northern lands. Scholars have proposed numerous origins, trying to match the names of the Sea Peoples with known populations or geographical locations. Are the Dinye and Danans Greeks? Are the Shikalesh from Sicily Sicels? Could the Lukka be from Lycia in southwestern Anatolia? Were the Aquesh a group of Achaeans, another term for Greeks? Some have even suggested origins as far west as Sardinia, for the Shardana, or Etruria in Italy. The theories are as numerous and varied as the sea peoples themselves. It's like trying to solve a giant geopolitical jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half are written in a language you can barely decipher. Historians still argue whether the sea peoples were the primary cause of the Bronze Age collapse, or if they were more like opportunistic vultures, taking advantage of already weakening empires and social structures. The collapse was likely a complex phenomenon with multiple interconnected causes, prolonged droughts, and climate change, evidence for which has been mounting from paleoclimatology, leading to famine and population displacement, internal rebellions and civil wars within the established kingdoms, earthquakes, the earthquake storm theory, disruption of long-distance trade routes in essential commodities like copper and tin, needed to make bronze the era's crucial metal. And yes, the incursions of these mysterious groups. Perhaps these groups were themselves displaced by these same environmental or political pressures, becoming raiders and refugees simultaneously, a desperate tide washing over the established order. Imagine your own civilization collapsing due to drought and famine, forcing you to take to your boats with your families, seeking new lands, and inevitably clashing with those already living there. It paints a more tragic, less purely villainous picture, a quirky tidbit for you. One of the sea peoples, the Checker, are mentioned in the 11th century BCE Egyptian story of Wenamun as having settled in Dor, a port city on the coast of Canaan, modern Israel. Wenamun, an Egyptian official sent to Byblos to acquire cedarwood, has a rather unfortunate encounter with him, getting robbed by his own crew and then having trouble with the Checker Prince of Dor. It's a small, almost mundane story, but provides a rare glimpse of one sea people's group after they had seemingly settled down, no longer just marauding invaders but part of the new political landscape of the Levant. It's like finding out that the scary pirates from the stories eventually opened a seaside tavern and mostly just grumbled about fishing quotas. The terrifying aspect of the sea peoples is their anonymity and the sheer scale of the destruction associated with their arrival. They appear on the scene, wreak havoc, and in many cases, effectively erase or fundamentally alter the cultures they encounter. They are a force of historical entropy, a wave of chaos that sweeps away the old order. The Hittite Empire, a major power for centuries, vanishes almost completely from the historical record after being overrun. The sophisticated palace-based Mycenaean civilization in Greece collapses into a period of poverty and illiteracy that lasts for centuries. You can almost feel the lights going out across the Mediterranean world. The Egyptians, under Ramesses III, famously claimed to have defeated the sea peoples in major land and sea battles around 1177 BCE, preventing them from overrunning Egypt itself, though some groups, like the Peleset/Philistines, did settle in nearby Canaan, perhaps with Egyptian acquiescence or as defeated remnants. The Medinet Habu inscriptions boast, "As for those who reached my frontier, their seed is not, their heart and their soul are finished forever and ever." From the tumultuous, crashing waves stirred by the enigmatic sea peoples, our journey now takes us back to the island of Crete, but to a time slightly earlier, or perhaps contemporaneous with, the first whispers of their destructive migrations. We find ourselves once again in the realm of the Minoans, that sophisticated and artistic Bronze Age civilization that flourished before the rise of Mycenaean Greece. But this time, we're not exploring the grand, labyrinthine palace of Knossos. Instead, you are in southern Crete, perhaps at the slightly less imposing, but still significant Minoan palace of Phaistos. Imagine sifting through the ruins, the Cretan sun warm on your back, when an archaeologist uncovers something small, flat, and round, made of baked clay. It's unassuming at first glance, about 15 centimeters, just under 6 inches in diameter, roughly the size of a modern CD or a small frisbee. But as the dust is brushed away, it reveals something utterly unique and baffling, the Phaistos disc. Discovered in 1908 by the Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier in a basement room or temple repository, depending on interpretation of the Phaistos Palace, the disc is a mainstream historical fact, one of the most famous and frustrating puzzles in Aegean archaeology. It's covered on both sides with a spiral of stamped symbols, hieroglyph-like characters pressed into the soft clay before it was fired. There are 241 or 242 distinct tokens or impressions in total. Counting is a bit tricky due to damage on one edge, comprising 45 unique signs. These signs are pictographic, meaning they depict recognizable objects: a plumed head, a fish, a bird, a ship, a house, a bee, a flower, a man walking, a woman, a shield, and so on. You can almost feel the slight indentation of each symbol under your fingertips, the careful work of whoever pressed them into the clay so long ago. The truly terrifying secret here isn't one of monsters or divine curses, but of profound, unyielding silence. We have no idea what the Phaistos disc says. None. Zero. Zilch. Despite over a century of intense scrutiny by linguists, archaeologists, cryptographers, both amateur and professional, and probably a few people who just really like a good puzzle, its script remains undeciphered. It's a message from a lost world, tantalizingly dangled before us, but its meaning is locked away, perhaps forever. You can imagine scholar after scholar, generation after generation, staring at high-resolution photographs or replicas of the disc, their brows furrowed in concentration, hope slowly giving way to frustration, then perhaps to a new outlandish theory before the cycle begins anew. It's the ultimate linguistic cold case. What makes it so difficult? Several factors. Firstly, it's unique. No other object with this exact script has ever been found. This lack of comparative material, what linguists call a corpus, is a massive hurdle. Imagine trying to learn English with only a single, short, circular paragraph. Good luck figuring out the grammar, let alone the vocabulary. Secondly, we don't know for sure what language it represents. Is it Minoan, the presumably indigenous language of Crete? Or is it from somewhere else, an import? If it is Minoan, it's related to two other undeciphered Minoan scripts, Cretan hieroglyphic, found on seals and clay documents, slightly older than the disc, and linear, a more cursive script used for administrative purposes on clay tablets, which we'll get to in a later section. While linear A is also undeciphered, there's at least more of it, allowing for some pattern recognition. The Phaistos disc script seems different from both, though it shares a few signs with linear A and Cretan hieroglyphs, hinting at a possible connection. A quirky tidbit for you. The symbols on the Phaistos disc were not individually inscribed or carved. Instead, they were impressed into the clay using preformed stamps or seals, one for each unique character. This makes it one of the earliest known examples of typography, or printing with movable type, millennia before Gutenberg. Think about that. The Minoans had the concept of reusable character stamps. Why didn't this lead to a printing revolution? Perhaps the script was too sacred or too specialized, or maybe they just didn't have a good business model for mass-producing clay frisbees of wisdom. The level of detail on some of these tiny stamps is remarkable, suggesting skilled craftsmanship. You can almost picture the artisan carefully selecting each stamp, pressing it into the wet clay, working their way around the spiral. The direction of the text is also clear. It spirals from the outside edge towards the center on both sides. This is evident from the way some symbols are slightly compressed or overlapped where the scribe was running out of space, a common issue even for ancient typesetters, apparently. The symbols are grouped into words or phrases by incised vertical lines. There are 61 such words in total. But without knowing the sounds these symbols represent, or the language's structure, these divisions don't get us much further. It's like looking at a sentence in a language you don't know, written in an alphabet you can't read. You can see where the words start and end, but that's about it. Theories about the disc's content abound, ranging from the scholarly to the, well, let's just say, enthusiastically creative. Is it a hymn to a Minoan deity? A magical incantation? A king list? A legal document? A farming almanac? A board game? Unlikely, but hey, stranger things have been proposed. Some have even suggested it's a geometric theorem, a sacred text from Atlantis. Atlantis will get to you too. Or even a hoax, though this is widely dismissed by mainstream archaeology due to the circumstances of its discovery and the material analysis of the clay. Historians still argue whether its purpose was religious, administrative, literary, or something else entirely. Its careful production suggests it was an object of some importance, not just casual doodles. The context of its discovery, in what might have been a temple archive or a repository for valuable items within the palace complex, near a linear A tablet, hints at an official or sacred character. The meaning of the individual pictograms themselves has been debated. That plumed head, is it a warrior, a priest, a specific ethnic group? The ship, does it signify trade, travel, or a naval power? The bee, a symbol of royalty, industry, or a particular goddess. Each symbol is a tiny window into the Minoan world, but the view is frustratingly obscured. Trying to read it purely pictographically like a rebus puzzle has generally failed, as most ancient scripts that started as pictograms quickly evolved to represent sounds, phonograms, or ideas, ideograms, in more complex ways. One of the most famous attempts at decipherment came from a German scholar, Gunter Neumann, who suggested that a recurring sequence of 5 signs, beginning with the plumed head symbol that appears 19 times, making it the most frequent, might represent the name of a ruler or a deity. This is a common approach in decipherment, looking for repeated patterns that could be proper nouns. However, without a bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone, which had the same inscription in 3 scripts, including known Greek, and was key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs, or a much larger body of text in the same script, such proposals remain speculative. You're left holding this enigmatic clay circle in your mind's eye. It feels warm from the ancient Cretan sun that baked it hard, preserving its secrets for millennia. It is a profoundly lonely artifact, a single, eloquent, if unreadable voice from a civilization that, for all its artistic achievements and sophisticated culture, still guards many of its deepest thoughts from us. The Phaistos disc is a testament to the limits of our knowledge, a beautiful, frustrating reminder that the past doesn't always give up its secrets easily or at all. It whispers of a complex world, of symbols and meanings that were once clear and potent to its creators, but now float just beyond our grasp. You turn it over and over, the spiral of unknown signs drawing you in, a tiny, silent vortex in the vast ocean of ancient mysteries. What message did they deem so important to commit to fired clay with such care, using such innovative technology, only for it to become one of history's most famous question marks? The disc doesn't answer. It just spins silently through time, leaving the silent spinning riddle of the Phaistos disc on its dusty Cretan shelf. We now set sail into a much larger and far more contentious body of water, the vast ocean of speculation surrounding Atlantis. You can almost feel the familiar pull of this legendary name, a name that has captivated dreamers, scholars, mystics, and outright charlatans for centuries. It's a name that conjures images of a utopian, technologically advanced civilization, a golden age of wisdom and power, tragically swallowed by the sea in a cataclysmic event. But did Atlantis actually exist? Or is it merely the most enduring and elaborate, terrifying Greek secret that was never a secret at all, but a philosophical invention? The entire concept of Atlantis comes to us from one primary source, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. This is the crucial mainstream historical fact. In 2 of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, written around 360 BCE, Plato, through the voice of his characters, Critias, Hermocrates, Socrates, and Timaeus, spins a detailed tale of this mighty island empire. He presents it as a true story, an account passed down through his family from the great Athenian statesman Solon, who supposedly heard it from Egyptian priest Sais. These priests, according to Solon, had ancient records describing how Athens, 9,000 years before Solon's time, which would place Atlantis' demise around 9,600 BCE, deep in prehistoric times, had heroically defeated the arrogant and aggressive Atlantean Empire. Shortly after this war, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. You can imagine Plato's audience, his students at the academy in Athens, listening intently to this dramatic tale. Was he recounting genuine history, a lost chapter of human civilization? Or was he, as many scholars believe, crafting an elaborate allegory, a philosophical fable designed to explore themes of ideal states, divine justice, the dangers of hubris, and the cyclical nature of civilizations? This is the core of the debate that rages to this day. Plato's description of Atlantis is remarkably detailed. He paints a picture of a vast island, larger than Libya and Asia Minor put together, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, usually identified as the Strait of Gibraltar, placing Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean. It was a rich and powerful kingdom, founded by Poseidon. Yes, him again, he seems to get around, doesn't he? Especially when it comes to islands and bulls, and his mortal wife Clyto. The island was arranged in concentric rings of land and water, with magnificent palaces, temples, canals, and shipyards. The capital city boasted walls coated in precious metals, brass, tin, and the mysterious fiery orichalcum, a metal second only to gold in value, which the Atlanteans supposedly mined on their island. They had a powerful military, advanced engineering, and a sophisticated society. But, as is often the way in such tales, their virtue declined. They became greedy, corrupt, and arrogant, seeking to conquer the world. And so the gods, or divine justice, struck them down. It's a compelling story with all the hallmarks of a grand epic. But the 9,000-year time frame before Solon is a huge red flag for historians. That would place Atlantis firmly in the Mesolithic period, long before the rise of complex civilizations, metalworking on the scale described, or large-scale organized warfare as Plato depicts it. It's like saying the Roman Empire was founded in the Stone Age. This immense antiquity is one of the main reasons many scholars view Atlantis as a fictional construct, a mythical other against which Plato could compare his idealized ancient Athens. However, the lure of a lost, advanced civilization is powerful. For centuries, people have been trying to find a real-world basis for Atlantis. The candidates for its location are legion, scattered all over the globe. Some, taking Plato at his word about the Atlantic, have looked for it near the Azores, the Canary Islands, or even in the Americas long before Columbus, of course. Others, suspecting Plato might have been using beyond the Pillars of Hercules metaphorically, or that the location was garbled in transmission, have searched closer to home in the Mediterranean. One of the most popular and enduring Mediterranean Atlantis theories connects it to the Minoan civilization on Crete. Hello again, Crete, you busy island, and the catastrophic volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE. This eruption, one of the largest in human history, certainly had devastating consequences. It buried the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri on Thera under thick layers of pumice and ash, much like Pompeii, preserving it remarkably, and likely caused massive tsunamis that would have ravaged the coasts of Crete and other Aegean islands, severely impacting Minoan naval power and trade. You can almost feel the ground shake, see the sky darken with ash, hear the roar of the collapsing volcano, and the terrifying surge of the tsunami waves. It was undeniably a cataclysm. Could this Thera eruption be the single day and night of misfortune that destroyed Plato's Atlantis? The timing is much more plausible than 9,600 BCE, aligning with the decline of Minoan power. Minoan Crete was a sophisticated naval civilization with impressive palaces and art, fitting some aspects of Plato's description. The concentric rings of Atlantis could even be a distorted memory of the caldera formed by Thera's collapse. However, there are problems with this theory, too. Thera/Santorini is much smaller than Plato's Atlantis. Crete itself, while an island, didn't entirely disappear. And Plato clearly places Atlantis in the Atlantic, not the Aegean. Proponents of the Minoan theory argue that Solon might have misunderstood the Egyptian priests, or that the numbers like the 9,000 years, or the size of the island, were exaggerated or mistranslated by a factor of 10, a convenient but rather ad hoc adjustment to make the theory fit. It's a bit like tailoring the evidence to fit the legend, rather than the other way around. Historians still argue whether Plato intended his Atlantis story as literal history, a philosophical myth, or perhaps a blend of both, a fictional narrative woven around some garbled historical memories of past disasters or powerful forgotten kingdoms. Plato was, after all, a philosopher, not a historian in the Herodotan sense. His primary goal was to teach, to explore ideas. What better way to discuss the ideal state and the dangers of imperial overreach that create a grand cautionary tale? A quirky tidbit for you. The idea of orichalcum, that mysterious Atlantean metal, has fascinated people for ages. Plato describes it as flashing with a red light. In 2015, marine archaeologists discovered ingots of a reddish, brass-like alloy from a 2,600-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. Analysis showed it to be a type of brass, an alloy of copper and zinc. While this shipwreck predates Plato, some excitedly claimed it could be orichalcum, or at least something similar to what Plato might have heard about. It's a tantalizing, if not definitive, connection, like finding a piece of kryptonite in a Kansas cornfield. The terrifying secret of Atlantis, then, is perhaps not that a super-civilization vanished, but that the story itself is so seductive, so persistent, that it can obscure genuine historical inquiry and lead people down rabbit holes of fantasy and pseudoscience. Countless books, documentaries, and websites promote wild theories about Atlantis, often linking it to aliens, crystal power, psychic abilities, and every other New Age trope imaginable. It has become a sort of historical Rorschach test, onto which people project their own hopes, fears, and beliefs about humanity's past and future. Remember those advanced Antikythera mechanisms? Some fringe theories immediately try to link them to Atlantean technology. Of course, you are left floating in this sea of possibilities. Was Plato a brilliant fabulist, creating a myth that would outlive his philosophy in the popular imagination? Or was he preserving a genuine, if distorted, memory of a real place and a real catastrophe? If Atlantis was real, its disappearance represents an almost unimaginable loss of knowledge and human achievement. If it was a fable, its true secret is its enduring power to make us question, to make us dream, and perhaps to make us a little more critical of stories that sound too good or too catastrophically perfect to be entirely true. The quest for Atlantis, whether you believe it to be a search for a physical place or for a deeper philosophical meaning, continues to draw us in, a siren song from the depths of either the ocean or the human imagination. The waves of speculation crash around you, each one promising to reveal the truth, but the shore remains tantalizingly out of sight. We drag ourselves away from the alluring, perhaps illusory, shores of Atlantis and return to the blood-soaked soil of mainland Greece, specifically to the Peloponnese, the heartland of Mycenaean heroes and tragic dynasties. You can feel a palpable shift in the atmosphere from the grand, sweeping catastrophe of a lost civilization to something more intimate, more personal, yet arguably even more terrifying. A curse that clings to a single family generation after generation, driving them to commit unspeakable acts against their own kin. We are entering the shadowed, accursed halls of the House of Atrus. The story of the House of Atrus is not an unsolved historical event in the same way as Cambyses' Lost Army or the identity of the Sea Peoples. It's primarily the stuff of Greek myth and tragedy, immortalized in the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. However, the impact of these stories, their deep resonance in Greek culture, and the way they reflect genuine anxieties about hereditary guilt, divine justice, and the cyclical nature of violence, gives them a terrifying power that transcends mere fiction. You can almost feel the ancient stones of Mycenae, the legendary seat of this cursed family, radiating a cold, oppressive dread. The mainstream historical fact is that Mycenae was indeed a major center of power in late Bronze Age Greece, ruled by powerful warrior kings, and the archaeological remains, the Lion Gate, the shaft graves overflowing with gold, the massive Cyclopean walls, speak of a wealthy, martial, and perhaps ruthless society, a fitting backdrop for such dark tales. The curse begins, as such things often do, with an act of profound hubris and cruelty. Tantalus, the founder of the dynasty and a son of Zeus, which you think would give him some divine favor, but apparently not enough to grant him common sense, decided to test the omniscience of the gods. He invited them to a banquet, and as the main course, he butchered his own son, Pelops, cooked him, and served him in a stew. Yes, you read that correctly. He fed his son to the gods. Talk about a dinner party faux pas that will get you uninvited from Olympus permanently. Most of the gods, being omniscient and all, recoiled in horror, except for Demeter, who, distracted by her grief over Persephone, remember her from Eleusis, accidentally ate a piece of Pelops' shoulder. Zeus, thoroughly unimpressed with Tantalus's culinary experiment, condemned him to an eternity of punishment in Tartarus, to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree with low branches, with the fruit ever eluding his grasp, and the water always receding before he could drink. Hence the word tantalize. You can just picture him there, forever thirsty, forever hungry, the ultimate lesson in don't mess with the gods, and definitely don't serve them your children. Pelops, meanwhile, was reassembled by the gods, with a new shoulder made of ivory, courtesy of Demeter's accidental snack or rather chic, if slightly macabre prosthetic. But the taint of his father's crime, and the act of being, well, cannibalized and then brought back to life, seems to have set a rather unfortunate precedent for the family. Pelops himself wasn't entirely innocent. To win the hand of Hippodamia, he had to defeat her father, King Oenomaus, in a chariot race. Oenomaus had a habit of killing all unsuccessful suitors. Pelops, rather than relying on skill alone, bribed Oenomaus's charioteer, Myrtilus, to replace the bronze linchpins of the king's chariot with ones made of wax. The wax melted, the chariot crashed. Oenomaus was killed, and Pelops won. However, Pelops then betrayed and murdered Myrtilus, who, as he was dying, cursed Pelops and his descendants. So we have parricide, cannibalism, bribery, betrayal, and now a fresh curse laid upon the family. They're really racking up the karmic debt here. It's like a frequent flyer program for divine retribution. And now we get to Pelops' sons, Atreus and Thyestes, who bring the family dysfunction to a whole new horrifying level. They vied for the throne of Mycenae. At one point, Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife Erope and stole a golden fleeced ram, a symbol of kingship, from Atreus. Atreus, understandably miffed, eventually pretended to reconcile with his brother and invited him to a banquet. And what did Atreus serve his dear brother Thyestes? You guessed it, Thyestes' own sons, butchered and cooked. This family really needs to rethink its catering choices. After Thyestes had unknowingly feasted on his children, Atreus revealed the heads and hands of the boys, just to make sure the horror really sank in. Thyestes, in his agony and rage, laid another powerful curse upon Atreus and his descendants. Historians still argue, or rather literary scholars do, about the precise psychological and societal anxieties these tales of intrafamilial violence and cannibalism tapped into within ancient Greek society. Were they simply sensational horror stories, or did they reflect deeper fears about the fragility of civilization and the dark potential lurking within human nature, even within the closest family bonds? The curse continues with Atreus' sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and leader of the Greek forces in the Trojan War, sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to the goddess Artemis to gain favorable winds for his fleet to sail to Troy. Another father, another sacrificed child. This family has a terrible track record with parenting. When Agamemnon finally returned victorious from Troy, 10 years later, he was murdered in his bath by his wife, Clytemnestra, Iphigenia's understandably enraged mother, and her lover, Aegisthus. And who was Aegisthus? He was the sole surviving son of Thyestes, born from an incestuous union between Thyestes and his own daughter, Pelopeia, an act undertaken on the advice of an oracle as the only way to produce an avenger against Atreus. So the cycle of vengeance continues, blood calling for blood. You can almost hear the Furies, the ancient goddesses of vengeance, cackling in the shadowy corners of the palace, rubbing their hands in anticipation of more gore. Then comes Agamemnon's son, Orestes. Driven by Apollo's command and his own sense of duty to avenge his father, Orestes, with the help of his sister Electra, murders his mother Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. Matricide. Now Orestes is pursued relentlessly by the Furies, tormented by guilt and madness, until he is finally purified and acquitted in a trial presided over by Athena in Athens, as dramatized in Aeschylus's Orestia trilogy. This trial, in some interpretations, represents the triumph of civic justice and reason over the ancient, unending cycle of personal vendetta and blood feuds. It's a glimmer of hope, a potential end to the curse, but the path to it is paved with unimaginable suffering. A quirky tidbit for you: the Mask of Agamemnon, a famous gold funeral mask discovered by Heinrich Schliemann in a shaft grave at Mycenae in 1876, is almost certainly not Agamemnon's. It dates to about 1550 to 1500 BCE, several centuries before the traditional date of the Trojan War around 1200 BCE. Schliemann, a brilliant but sometimes overly enthusiastic archaeologist, was eager to connect his finds directly to the heroes of Homeric legend. So, while it's an incredible piece of Mycenaean art, it belonged to an earlier unknown king or prince, perhaps one who suffered his own unrecorded family tragedies. It's like finding a really cool hat and insisting it belonged to Abraham Lincoln, even though the hat is clearly from the 1970s. The terrifying secret of the House of Atreus isn't a hidden chamber or a lost artifact. It's the inescapable nature of the curse itself, the idea that sin and guilt can be hereditary, passed down like a genetic defect, poisoning a family line for generations. It's the horror of being doomed by the actions of your ancestors, destined to repeat their crimes or suffer for them. It explores the darkest corners of human psychology: ambition, jealousy, betrayal, revenge, and the unspeakable acts that people, even those bound by blood, can commit against each other when consumed by these passions. You walk through the imposing Lion Gate at Mycenae, imagining the well-grieved Achaeans of Homer, but also feeling the chill of this legendary curse. Were these stories just myths, or did they perhaps reflect the brutal realities of power struggles in the Bronze Age, where dynasties rose and fell through violence and betrayal? The cycle of tit-for-tat revenge, the endless blood feuds, were a real problem in ancient societies, and these myths served as powerful cautionary tales. They explored the agonizing choices faced by individuals caught between conflicting loyalties: loyalty to family, to the gods, to the state. What you do when your divine duty is to kill your own mother to avenge your father? There are no easy answers, only tragedy. The House of Atreus holds up a dark mirror to humanity, showing us the horrifying potential for self-destruction when rage and vengeance are allowed to fester and grow, passed down like a poisoned heirloom. The whispers of Tantalus, Pelops, Atreus, Thyestes, Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, and Orestes still echo from the ancient stones, a chilling reminder that some secrets are not buried in the earth, but in the bloodlines of families, carried in the tormented hearts of men and women trapped in a nightmare of their ancestors' making, leaving the grand, cursed halls of Mycenae. Where familial bloodshed was practically a competitive sport, we journey south, deeper into the Peloponnese, to a state that prided itself on discipline, austerity, and a military prowess that was legendary throughout the ancient world, Sparta. You can almost feel the air become sharper, more regimented, the vibrant colors of Minoan frescoes and Mycenaean gold replaced by a stark, militaristic efficiency. But beneath the gleaming reputation of Spartan warriors, beneath the tales of their bravery at Thermopylae, lie unsettling whispers of a brutal, secretive training system designed to forge them, the Agoge. And it's here, in the shadows of this infamous upbringing, that some of the most terrifying and often unspoken aspects of Spartan society lurk. The Agoge was the rigorous, state-sponsored education and training regimen mandated for all male Spartan citizens, Spartiates, from the age of 7 until they reach adulthood. This is a mainstream historical fact, central to understanding Spartan society. Its purpose was singular: to produce peerless soldiers, utterly devoted to the state, capable of enduring any hardship, and instilled with a fierce loyalty to their comrades and an unshakable obedience to orders. You can picture these young boys, barely more than children, taken from their families, their mothers famously telling them to come back with your shield, or on it, a rather stark "good luck at school, dear" message. The details of the Agoge, however, are not recorded by the Spartans themselves. Spartans were notoriously laconic, a word derived from Laconia, the region Sparta dominated, meaning they were people of few words. They didn't write much down, especially not about their most secret and sacred institutions. Most of what we know or think we know about the Agoge comes from non-Spartan writers like Xenophon, an Athenian admirer of Sparta, Plutarch, a Greek biographer writing centuries later under Roman rule, and Plato, who occasionally commented on Spartan practices. These outside observers were often looking at Sparta through a lens of admiration, criticism, or simple fascination with a society so different from their own. This means our understanding is filtered, incomplete, and possibly romanticized or, conversely, demonized. What these sources describe is a life of extreme hardship and deprivation. Boys were organized into age groups, or herds, ageli, lived in communal barracks, and were deliberately underfed. They were encouraged to steal food to supplement their meager rations, but if caught, they were severely punished, not for stealing, but for the clumsiness of being caught. This was meant to teach them cunning, resourcefulness, and stealth. You can imagine these hungry boys, like a pack of young wolves, learning to forage and pilfer, the constant gnawing hunger a driving force. It's like a perpetual, high-stakes episode of a survival reality show, only with more floggings and less chance of being voted off the island unless you died, which was presumably an option. They went barefoot year-round, wore a single thin garment in all weathers, and slept on beds they made themselves from reeds gathered from the Eurotas River, without knives. Physical training was relentless: running, wrestling, javelin and discus throwing, combat drills. Pain and hardship were to be endured without complaint. Plutarch tells us that boys were ritually flogged at the altar of Artemis Orthia, sometimes to the point of death, as a test of their endurance and a religious offering. While the veracity and precise nature of this ritual, the diamastagosis, are debated, with some scholars suggesting its more extreme forms were a later Roman-era spectacle, the emphasis on brutal physical conditioning and the stoic acceptance of pain is a consistent theme. You can almost hear the thud of fists, the crack of whips, the grunts of exertion, and the chilling silence of boys refusing to cry out. But it's the unspoken or less documented aspects of the Agoge that hold a particular terror. What about the psychological impact of such a system? The constant surveillance, the intense competition, the institutionalized bullying by older boys designed to toughen up the younger ones? The emotional stunting that might result from separating children from their families at such a young age and immersing them in an exclusively male, militaristic environment? These are questions that the ancient sources, focused on the system's effectiveness in producing soldiers, rarely delve into. One of the most controversial and shadowy aspects of the Agoge is the institution of the Cryptia. This is often described as a kind of Spartan secret police or death squad, composed of the most promising and resourceful young men from the Agoge. According to sources like Plutarch, members of the Cryptia would be sent out into the Laconian countryside with only a knife, forced to live off the land, and tasked with secretly assassinating helots, the subjugated Messenian population who were essentially state-owned serfs, outnumbering the Spartan citizens by a significant margin and living in constant fear of them. This served a dual purpose: to terrorize the helot population and prevent rebellion, and to further blood the young Spartans, teaching them to kill stealthily and ruthlessly. Historians still argue vehemently about the true nature, scale, and purpose of the Cryptia. Was it a widespread, regular practice, a key component of Spartan social control? Or was it a more limited, perhaps exaggerated, institution, its horrifying reputation more potent than its actual deeds? The very secrecy surrounding it makes it difficult to assess. You can imagine these young men, shadows in the night, stalking their unsuspecting helot victims, the cold steel of their knives a chilling extension of the state's brutal will. It's a terrifying image of state-sanctioned murder as a form of advanced military training. Another unsettling, though perhaps less terrifying and more awkward dinner party conversation, aspect of Spartan life that grew out of the Agoge system was the formalized pederastic relationships between older warriors/mentors and adolescent boys. While common in various forms across ancient Greece and Sparta, it was seemingly integrated into the military training structure. The older man, the eras or lover, was meant to be a role model, inspiring the younger boy, the ates or hearer, later eromenos or beloved, to valor and virtue. The precise nature of these relationships, purely pedagogical and comradely, or involving a physical dimension, is, as with much in Sparta, debated and obscured by the lack of Spartan testimony. Xenophon, an admirer, downplays the physical, emphasizing the mentorship. Other sources hint at a more accepted erotic component. Regardless, it adds another layer of complexity and potential for power imbalance and emotional distress within the already harsh environment of the Agoge. A quirky tidbit for you: Spartan girls also had their own form of state-supervised education, though separate from the boys' Agoge and not focused on military training for combat. They engaged in athletics, running, wrestling, throwing the javelin and discus, and danced and sang in public. The aim was to produce strong, healthy mothers who would bear strong, healthy Spartan warriors. They apparently exercised nude or in short tunics alongside the boys, a practice that shocked and scandalized other Greeks. Those Spartan girls, an Athenian might sniff, running around half-naked. What is the world coming to? But for the Spartans, it was all part of producing a robust citizenry. The terrifying secret of the Agoge, then, is not just the documented physical brutality, but the undocumented psychological toll, the moral compromises, and the chilling efficiency with which it turned young boys into instruments of the state. It was a system that prioritized the collective over the individual to an extreme degree, demanding absolute conformity and obedience. It raises uncomfortable questions about the price of security, the nature of freedom, and what happens when a society dedicates itself so completely to military strength that it sacrifices other aspects of humanity. You are left pondering the silence of those young boys, enduring unimaginable hardships, their individual voices lost in the disciplined roar of the Spartan phalanx. What unspoken terrors did they face in the barracks at night or out in the countryside as members of the Cryptia? The official story of Spartan valor is well known, but the hidden costs, the dark underbelly of the system that produced it, remain largely in the shadows, a chilling testament to a society that took the concept of tough love to a terrifying extreme. We leave the stark, disciplined plains of Sparta, the echoes of boys' harsh training fading, and journey to another famous Greek landscape, this time the fertile, volcanic island of Sicily, which was part of Magna Graecia, the coastal areas of Southern Italy and Sicily extensively colonized by Greek settlers. You can feel the rich, dark earth beneath your feet, the distant, brooding presence of a mighty volcano shaping the horizon. Our focus narrows to one particular enigmatic figure from the 5th century BCE, Empedocles of Acragas, modern Agrigento. He was a philosopher, poet, statesman, physician, and if you believe some accounts, a miracle worker and a self-proclaimed god. But it's the legendary and frankly bizarre manner of his death that has secured his place among the terrifying Greek secrets, his supposed leap into the fiery crater of Mount Etna. Empedocles was a fascinating and flamboyant character, a true polymath. This is a mainstream historical fact. He was a significant pre-Socratic philosopher, known for his theory that all matter is composed of 4 fundamental elements: earth, air, fire, and water, acted upon by 2 opposing forces: love, which brings things together, and strife, which tears them apart. It's a surprisingly intuitive, if not scientifically accurate cosmology. He wrote in epic verse, fragments of which survive, and he was also reputed to be a skilled physician, even credited with reviving a woman who had appeared dead for 30 days, perhaps a very deep coma, or Empedocles was just really good at CPR, or maybe just good at storytelling. You can almost picture him, perhaps clad in purple robes, wearing a golden laurel wreath, bronze sandals, and proclaiming his divine status to an awestruck or deeply skeptical Sicilian crowd. He wasn't exactly the shy, retiring type of philosopher. His life was filled with dramatic claims and alleged miracles. He was said to have controlled the winds, banished plagues, and even to possess powers of prophecy. He presented himself not just as a wise man, but as an immortal being, a daimon who had fallen from a higher state and was now wandering the earth, seeking purification. This self-deification is a key part of his persona, and it sets the stage for his truly spectacular exit. The most famous story of his death, recounted by later biographers like Diogenes Laertius, who wrote in the 3rd century CE, so again, relying on much older, sometimes contradictory sources, is that Empedocles, wanting to prove his divinity and achieve a suitably dramatic apotheosis, climbed to the summit of Mount Etna, the massive active volcano that dominates eastern Sicily, and leaped into its fiery crater. The idea was that by disappearing without a trace into the heart of the volcano, consumed by the element of fire, he would convince his followers that he had indeed returned to the gods, that he hadn't died a mundane, mortal death but had ascended in a blaze of glory. You can imagine the scene, the philosopher perhaps giving a final, profound pronouncement before taking that fatal plunge into the smoking, molten abyss. It's an image of ultimate, terrifying commitment to one's own legend. However, the volcano, it seems, wasn't entirely cooperative in preserving the illusion. According to the tale, Etna later spat out one of Empedocles' distinctive bronze sandals, a rather inconvenient piece of evidence that suggested a less than divine and rather more incinerated end. That single, fire-belched sandal is such a perfect, almost comically macabre detail. It's like the universe saying, "Nice try, buddy, but here's your shoe back." This sandal, if the story is true, became a rather famous and slightly singed relic. But did it really happen this way? Was Empedocles so committed to his divine persona that he staged such a dramatic and ultimately fatal public relations stunt? Or is this story a later embellishment, a legend that grew up around a charismatic and unconventional figure, perhaps concocted by his detractors to mock his claims of divinity, or by his more fervent admirers to enhance his mystique? This is where the unsolved secret lies. Historians still argue whether Empedocles' volcanic demise was a historical event, a symbolic myth, or a deliberate fabrication. There are, of course, alternative accounts of his death. Some say he died in exile in the Peloponnese, perhaps from a fall or illness, a much more prosaic end for such a theatrical man. Others suggest he simply vanished, taken by the gods in a less fiery, more discreet manner. The story of the Etna leap, however, is the one that has captured the popular imagination, probably because it's so perfectly in character for a man who claimed to be a god and wrote about the cosmic dance of fire. It's the ultimate going out with a bang. The motivation behind such a self-immolation, if it occurred, is also debated. Was it a desperate act of a man whose influence was waning, a final gamble to secure his legacy? Was it a genuine belief that this act would transform him or unite him with the divine element of fire, a core component of his philosophy? Or was it, as some ancient satirists like Lucian suggested, simply the act of a madman or an attention seeker? You can almost hear the ancient gossip. Did you hear about Empedocles? Threw himself into Etna. Always said he was a bit too fond of fire, that one. A quirky tidbit for you. Empedocles was also a political figure in Acragas, a champion of democracy who helped overthrow a tyranny. He was apparently offered the kingship but refused it, preferring his philosophical and spiritual pursuits, and perhaps his divine status made mere kingship seem like a demotion. This political engagement makes him a more complex figure than just an eccentric mystic. He was clearly a man of action as well as a man of dramatic pronouncements. Maybe his political enemies helped spread the more outlandish stories about his death? Yeah, that Empedocles, the one who kept telling us he was a god. He, spontaneously combusted. Totally. Nothing to see here. The image of a philosopher willingly embracing a volcanic inferno is undeniably terrifying. It speaks of an intensity of belief, or perhaps a depth of despair or delusion, that is hard for us to comprehend. Mount Etna itself is a powerful, awe-inspiring, and dangerous natural force. For the ancient Greeks living in its shadow, it was a place of divine power, associated with Hephaestus, the god of fire and smithery, and with the Cyclopes who were said to forge Zeus's thunderbolts in its fiery depths. To choose such a place for one's end is to make a profound statement. The story of Empedocles and Etna resonates with other myths of mortals who aspire too high or blur the lines between human and divine, like Icarus flying too close to the sun, whose father Daedalus, you'll remember, was also a Sicilian connection after escaping Crete. Was Empedocles a genuine sage who glimpsed profound truths and perhaps possessed abilities we don't understand? Or was he a charismatic showman, a master illusionist whose final trick went slightly awry thanks to a rebellious bronze sandal? We are left gazing at the smoking peak of Mount Etna, wondering about the philosopher who may or may not have sought his immortality in its fiery heart. The volcano keeps its secrets well, occasionally offering up plumes of smoke and flows of lava, but rarely the definitive answers to ancient mysteries. The tale of Empedocles' volcanic ascension, or rather his fiery descent, remains a potent symbol of the sometimes thin line between genius and madness, between profound philosophical insight and terrifying self-delusion. Did he find enlightenment in the flames, or just a very hot, very final end? The ashes of Etna whisper conflicting stories, and that single, legendary bronze sandal serves as a tantalizing, slightly comical, and deeply unsettling clue to a philosopher's truly explosive exit strategy. From the fiery, speculative demise of Empedocles on Sicily, we sail back across the Ionian Sea, returning once more to the enigmatic island of Crete, the cradle of the Minoan civilization. We visited the labyrinthine palace of Knossos and pondered the unique, spiraling mystery of the Phaistos disk. Now you find yourself in a dusty storeroom, perhaps in the ruins of Knossos, Phaistos, or another Minoan administrative center like Chania. Before you are rows upon rows of unassuming clay tablets, incised with delicate, regular lines and symbols. This is Linear A, the primary administrative script of the Minoan civilization, used roughly from the 18th to the 15th centuries BCE. And like its more flamboyant cousin, the Phaistos disk script, Linear A holds a terrifying secret. It remains undeciphered, a silent testament to a lost language in a world of thought we can only glimpse. The existence of Linear A tablets, primarily used for record-keeping, is a mainstream historical fact. Thousands of fragments have been unearthed across Crete and even on some Aegean islands under Minoan influence. These are not grand literary works or philosophical treatises. They are, for the most part, mundane administrative texts. Lists of agricultural produce like olives, figs, wine, grain, livestock, sheep, goats, oxen, personnel, and offerings to deities. You can almost picture a harried Minoan scribe, stylus in hand, meticulously tallying jars of olive oil or counting heads of sheep, the Bronze Age equivalent of an accountant filling out spreadsheets. No dramatic pronouncements, no epic poetry, just the day-to-day business of a complex palace economy. Yet, despite their often prosaic content, these tablets are immensely valuable because they represent the written language of the Minoans, a people who, as we've seen, created a vibrant and sophisticated culture. The script itself, named Linear A by Sir Arthur Evans, who also excavated Knossos and named the later decipher Mycenaean script Linear B, consists of about 90 phonetic, syllabic signs plus various ideograms, symbols representing whole words or concepts like man, wheat, or wine, and a system of numerals and fractions. The signs are elegant, more cursive and abstracted than the pictograms of the Phaistos disc or the earlier Cretan hieroglyphs from which Linear A likely evolved. The terrifying aspect here is the profound cultural amnesia that an undeciphered script represents. Imagine all of English literature, all our historical records, all our scientific knowledge, suddenly becoming unreadable, just meaningless squiggles on a page. That's the situation with Linear A. We have the physical remnants of their written thoughts, their economic organization, perhaps even hints of their religious practices through lists of offerings to deities whose names we can sometimes tantalizingly recognize, if they are indeed Minoan names and not loanwords, but we cannot truly hear them speak. Their language, the very vehicle of their thought and culture, is lost to us, locked away behind these graceful, frustrating symbols. You can stare at these tablets for hours, the little incised lines so clear, so deliberate, yet their meaning remains stubbornly out of reach. It's like listening to a beautiful song in a language you don't understand. You can appreciate the melody, but the lyrics, the story, are lost. Oh, why is Linear still undeciphered, especially when Linear B, which uses many similar-looking signs, was deciphered in the 1950s by Michael Ventris? The successful decipherment of Linear B was a monumental achievement, revealing that it was an early form of Greek, used by the Mycenaeans who later dominated Crete and other Minoan centers. Because many Linear B signs had phonetic values that could be tentatively applied to similar-looking Linear A signs, hopes were high that Linear A would quickly yield its secrets. But it hasn't. When the Linear B phonetic values are applied to Linear A, the resulting words don't seem to match any known language, and certainly not Greek. This strongly suggests that the underlying language of Linear A, the true Minoan language, is not Greek, nor is it closely related to any other known ancient language family like Semitic or Anatolian languages such as Hittite. This makes it a language isolate or part of a language family that has otherwise vanished without a trace, which is a huge barrier to decipherment. Without a known related language to provide clues about grammar, vocabulary, and phonology, progress is incredibly slow. Historians still argue about the potential linguistic affiliations of Minoan. Could it be related to Luwian, an Anatolian language? Or perhaps Tersinian languages, a hypothetical family including Etruscan, another largely undeciphered language from ancient Italy, and Lemnian? Or is it something entirely unique to the Aegean? The debate is ongoing, filled with complex linguistic arguments and, unfortunately, not enough data. We need more Linear A text, preferably longer inscriptions or, the holy grail of decipherment, a bilingual text, a Linear A inscription with a parallel translation in a known language. Remember the Rosetta Stone for Egyptian hieroglyphs, or the Behistun inscription for Old Persian cuneiform. Linear A has no such convenient key. It's like trying to pick a very complex lock with only a couple of bent paper clips and a lot of wishful thinking. A quirky tidbit for you. While most linear A inscriptions are short and administrative, there are a few exceptions that hint at other uses. Some libation vessels, ritual pouring jugs, found in religious contexts, like at the peak sanctuary of Mount Juctas, bear short linear A inscriptions. These are thought to be dedications or religious formulae. For example, one famous formula, which appears on several libation tables, is often transliterated using linear B sound values with much scholarly caution as something like ATAIWAJA or JSASARAME. What these mean is anyone's guess. To the great goddess Atiwaja, may our prayers be heard by Jasasarane? We simply don't know. It's like finding a post-it note that says FLGRB's Nork. It clearly meant something to the person who wrote it, but to you, it's just a string of letters. These ritual texts are particularly tantalizing because they might offer a glimpse into Minoan religious beliefs, if only we could read them. The content of the administrative tablets, even without full decipherment, does give us some clues. We can identify ideograms for commodities, count them using the Minoan numeral system, which was decimal like ours, and sometimes recognize patterns of distribution or collection. We can see that the palaces were centers of economic redistribution, managing agricultural surplus and craft production. We can even tentatively identify some place names on Crete that also appear in later linear B tablets, when the Mycenaeans were using Greek to administer the same island. But the names of the people, the titles of the officials, the verbs describing their actions, these remain largely opaque. You feel a sense of profound frustration looking at these elegant, silent tablets. Here is a civilization that built magnificent palaces, created stunning art, and traded across the Mediterranean, yet we cannot understand their own words about themselves. Their voices are trapped in the baked clay. The decipherment of linear A would be a monumental breakthrough, opening a direct window into Minoan society, religion, and thought, unmediated by later Greek myths or the biases of Mycenaean conquerors. It would give the Minoans their voice back. Until then, they remain a beautifully sophisticated, yet deeply silent culture. Their language is perhaps the greatest, most profound secret they still keep from us, a constant reminder of how much of the ancient world remains lost, perhaps irretrievably, in the quiet dust of undeciphered scripts. The little lines on the clay seem to mock your efforts to understand, a silent challenge from a world just beyond your linguistic reach. We carefully place the silent linear A tablets back onto their dusty shelves, the Minoan language still eluding our grasp, and fast forward many centuries, leaving the Bronze Age behind. Our journey takes us to the gleaming, formidable city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, a beacon of civilization and power that endured for over 1,000 years after the fall of Rome in the West. You can almost smell the sea salt from the Golden Horn, hear the cacophony of a bustling medieval metropolis, and see the glint of mosaics on church domes. But within the heavily fortified walls of this great city, within its shipyards and arsenals, lay a terrifying and closely guarded military secret, a weapon so fearsome it could turn the tide of naval battles and strike terror into the hearts of their enemies: Greek fire. The existence and devastating effectiveness of Greek fire is a mainstream historical fact. First used by the Byzantines in naval combat around the 7th century CE, notably during the Arab sieges of Constantinople, it was a liquid incendiary weapon that could be projected from siphons or pumps mounted on the prows of Byzantine warships known as dromons. Imagine the scene: enemy ships approaching, confident in their numbers, only to be met by terrifying streams of fire erupting from the Byzantine vessels. This fire was said to burn on water, to cling to ships and men, and to be incredibly difficult to extinguish. Sand or vinegar were supposedly needed, as water only seemed to spread it. You can picture the panic, the screams of burning sailors, the enemy fleets thrown into disarray as their wooden ships were consumed by this unholy, unquenchable flame. It was the napalm of its day, a true superweapon. The terrifying secret, of course, was its exact composition and the method of its deployment. The formula for Greek fire was a state secret of the highest order, guarded more jealously than any treasure. Knowledge of its manufacture was apparently restricted to a select few families or guilds, passed down from generation to generation. Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus, in his 9th century treatise De Administrando Imperio on governing the empire, explicitly warns his son and heir, Romanos II, never to reveal the secrets of Greek fire to foreigners, claiming it was shown and revealed by an angel to the great and holy first Christian Emperor Constantine, and that dire consequences will befall anyone who dared to share it. Divine revelation and heavenly wrath, that's some serious IP protection. You can almost hear the emperor whispering to his son, "Look, this stuff is our ace in the hole. Don't go blabbing about it to the Bulgarians or the Rus, okay?" An angel told Grandpa, and you don't mess with angels. So, what was in this hellish concoction? We don't know for sure. The exact recipe was lost with the eventual decline and fall of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, though Greek fire seems to have fallen out of common use even before that, perhaps due to the loss of key ingredients, skilled technicians, or simply evolving military tactics. However, based on descriptions of its properties and contemporary knowledge of available materials, scholars have made educated guesses. Likely ingredients probably included naphtha, a volatile petroleum product readily available in some parts of the Byzantine sphere of influence, like near the Black Sea, quicklime, calcium oxide, which reacts exothermically with water, generating heat, sulfur, and perhaps pine resin for adhesion and to thicken the mixture, or saltpeter, potassium nitrate, which would make it burn more fiercely and be harder to extinguish. Though its widespread use as an oxidizer in incendiaries is more associated with later gunpowder. The key seems to have been a petroleum base, which would explain why it floated and burned on water. The addition of quicklime could explain how it might ignite on contact with water, or at least how water would exacerbate the flames. Imagine the sheer terror of seeing fire that not only couldn't be put out by water, but seemed to feed on it. It would have been psychologically devastating to enemy sailors. Historians still argue about the precise combination of ingredients and mechanics of the projectors. Were the siphons simple pumps, or did they involve some kind of pressurized system? How was the mixture ignited? Was it pre-lit, or did it ignite spontaneously on contact with air or water due to a chemical reaction? Some accounts mention a loud roar and much smoke accompanying its deployment, suggesting a forceful projection. Anna Komnene, a Byzantine princess and historian writing in the 12th century, described its use against the Pisans, noting its terrifying appearance and the thunder it made. She also mentions that the operators were protected by shields. You can picture these specialized Byzantine marines, perhaps wearing some form of protective gear, though probably not up to modern hazmat standards, more like a slightly damp tunic and a prayer, manning these strange fire-spitting contraptions. A quirky tidbit for you: the term Greek fire itself is not what the Byzantines called it. They referred to it as sea fire, pyr Thalassian, Roman fire, pyr Romacan, war fire, Polemican pyr, liquid fire, hygron pyr, or sticky fire, Coletican pyr. The term Greek fire, ignis Graecus, was largely a Western European crusader term, used after they encountered this terrifying weapon during their interactions, both friendly and hostile, with the Byzantines. It's like how French fries aren't actually called that in France. The impact of Greek fire on Byzantine military history was significant. It was credited with saving Constantinople from two massive Arab sieges in 674 to 678 and 717 to 718 CE, events that, had they gone the other way, could have drastically altered the course of European and Middle Eastern history. It gave the Byzantine navy a crucial technological edge for centuries, allowing them to dominate the eastern Mediterranean sea lanes. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of Byzantine power and ingenuity, a deterrent as much as an active tool of war. Knowing your enemy possessed such a terrifying, seemingly magical weapon would certainly give you pause before attacking their fleet. The loss of the formula is a tantalizing historical puzzle. Did the knowledge simply fade as key ingredients became unavailable or too expensive? Did the specialized technicians die out without passing on their skills, perhaps during one of Constantinople's many sieges or internal upheavals? Or was it deliberately suppressed at some point, deemed too dangerous, or perhaps superseded by newer gunpowder weapons? Though Greek fire and gunpowder are different in nature and application, the mystery adds to its legend. It's a lost technology, like the Antikythera mechanism, but with a much more destructive and terrifying application. Remember the Antikythera mechanism's advanced gears? Imagine that level of ingenuity applied to creating a flamethrower. You're left imagining the Byzantine workshops, shrouded in secrecy, where this volatile substance was concocted. The acrid smell of sulfur and naphtha, the careful mixing of dangerous ingredients, the constant fear of an accidental explosion or a prying foreign spy. The formula for Greek fire remains one of history's most successfully kept and most horrifying military secrets. Its fiery breath saved an empire multiple times, but its recipe has now turned to smoke and ashes, leaving behind only awe, speculation, and the chilling memory of a flame that water could not conquer. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the most terrifying secrets are not ancient curses or philosophical conundrums, but the brutal, practical knowledge of how to unleash unparalleled destruction. We extinguish the lingering, spectral flames of Greek fire and turn our gaze towards a realm even darker and more mysterious than the secret arsenals of Byzantium. Our journey now takes us into the shadowy depths of the Greek underworld, the domain of Hades and Persephone, a place of dread, sorrow, and eternal twilight for most mortal souls. But one legendary figure, a musician and poet of unparalleled skill, dared to brave this terrifying realm while still alive, driven by a love so powerful it sought to defy death itself, Orpheus. You can almost hear the faint, mournful strains of a lyre echoing from the cavernous entrance to Hades, a melody so beautiful it could charm beasts, trees, and even the flinty hearts of the gods of the dead. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice is one of the most poignant and enduring myths from ancient Greece, a mainstream historical fact in terms of its widespread telling and cultural significance. Orpheus, son of the muse Calliope and either Apollo, god of music, among other things, or a Thracian king, was gifted with a musical talent that was nothing short of magical. His songs could soothe savage beasts, make rocks and trees move, and even halt rivers in their course. He fell deeply in love with a beautiful nymph named Eurydice, and they were married. Their happiness, however, was tragically short-lived. Soon after their wedding, Eurydice was bitten by a venomous snake, some say while fleeing the advances of Aristeus, a minor god of beekeeping, which seems like a rather unfair collateral damage situation for Eurydice, and died, her soul descending to the underworld. Orpheus was consumed by grief. His sorrowful music filled the land, moving gods and mortals alike. Unable to bear life without Eurydice, he made a desperate, unprecedented decision. He would journey to the underworld himself and try to bring her back. You can imagine the sheer audacity of this plan. The underworld was a one-way trip for mortals. No one simply strolled in, asked for a loved one back, and expected a positive response. It was a place of no return, guarded by fearsome creatures and ruled by implacable deities. Yet Orpheus, armed only with his lyre and his sorrowful songs, descended. He charmed Charon, the grim ferryman who carried souls across the river Styx, with his music, persuading him to take a living passenger. He lulled Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed dog guarding the gates of Hades, to sleep with his melodies. He passed through throngs of pale, flitting shades, his music bringing a momentary pause to their eternal sorrow. Finally, he reached the throne of Hades, the stern king of the dead, and his queen Persephone, remember her from the Eleusinian mysteries and her own abduction to this gloomy realm. There, in the heart of the underworld, Orpheus sang his plea. He sang of his love for Eurydice, of the beauty of the sunlit world she had lost, of the unbearable emptiness of his life without her. His music was so profoundly moving that even the cold, unyielding heart of Hades was touched. The Furies themselves, those relentless avengers who were busy chasing Orestes in another story, reportedly wept iron tears. Sisyphus, for a moment, stopped rolling his eternal boulder. Tantalus, our old friend, the one who served his son for dinner, briefly forgot his thirst. Persephone, perhaps remembering her own longing for the world above, interceded on Orpheus's behalf. Hades agreed to release Eurydice, but on one crucial, terrifying condition. Orpheus was to lead her out of the underworld, and he must not look back at her until they had both reached the sunlight of the upper world. If he turned to look at her even once before they were fully clear of Hades' domain, she would be lost to him forever. You can feel the agonizing tension of this condition, the desperate hope mixed with the terrible fear of failure. So Orpheus began the arduous ascent, Eurydice following silently behind him, a faint, shadowy presence. He could hear her footsteps, or perhaps just imagine them. The path was dark, steep, and filled with the whispers of the dead. The silence from behind him must have been deafening, the temptation to turn, to reassure himself that she was truly there, almost unbearable. He pressed on, through the gloom, towards the distant glimmer of light that marked the entrance to the world of the living. And then, just as he stepped out into the sunlight, just as he felt the warmth on his face, he made his fatal mistake. Perhaps out of overwhelming love and anxiety, perhaps fearing she had faltered or been snatched back, or perhaps simply forgetting the condition in his joy at reaching the light, he turned to look at Eurydice. She was still there, but only for a fleeting moment. Her form was shadowy, insubstantial. As he looked, she was drawn back with a faint sigh or a whispered farewell, into the darkness, lost to him forever. He reached for her, but grasped only air. "Farewell," she whispered as she faded away like smoke. You can feel the crushing weight of that second loss, the unbearable agony of having her so close, only to lose her again through his own all-too-human failure. It's a moment of pure, gut-wrenching tragedy. What horrifying truths did Orpheus witness in the underworld during his journey? Truths that perhaps contributed to his fatal impatience or his later despair. The myths don't dwell extensively on the specific horrors he saw, beyond the general gloom and the famous sufferers like Sisyphus and Tantalus. But imagine the endless fields of asphodel where ordinary shades wandered aimlessly, the rivers of woe, the terrifying judgments, the monstrous guardians. Did he see the uninitiated suffering a worse fate, reinforcing the value of mysteries like those at Eleusis? Did he glimpse the deeper, more terrifying regions of Tartarus where the truly wicked were punished? Historians still argue about the varying depictions of the Greek afterlife. Was it uniformly gloomy, or were there different levels and possibilities even before the Eleusinian promise of blessedness? Orpheus's journey would have exposed him to the raw, unfiltered reality of death as the Greeks conceived it, a vision that might haunt any living soul. After this second, final loss of Eurydice, Orpheus was inconsolable. He wandered the earth, shunning the company of women, singing his mournful songs only to the trees and rocks. His end is also tragic and violent. According to one common version, he was torn apart by a group of Maenads, the frenzied female followers of Dionysus, either because he spurned them, or because he neglected the worship of Dionysus in favor of Apollo, or simply because they were in a wild, ecstatic state. His dismembered limbs were scattered, but his head, still singing, floated down the Hebrus River and out to sea, eventually landing on the island of Lesbos, where an oracle of Orpheus was established. A quirky tidbit for you. The Orphic cults, which grew up around the figure of Orpheus, had their own distinct theology and practices, emphasizing asceticism, reincarnation, and a different cosmogony creation story than the more mainstream Olympian religion. These Orphic texts, often fragmented and mysterious, speak of the soul's journey and its potential for eventual liberation from the cycle of rebirth, a very different flavor from the state-sponsored rituals of Athens or the martial ethos of Sparta. The terrifying secret Orpheus brought back, then, wasn't just the sorrow of his personal loss, but perhaps a deeper, more unsettling understanding of the finality of death, the fragility of human hope against the implacable laws of the cosmos, and the agonizing burden of a love that transcends even the gates of Hades but cannot ultimately conquer them. His story is a profound meditation on love, loss, art, and the limits of human endeavor. Did he truly brave Hades, or is the story a powerful metaphor for the artist's descent into grief and the attempt to retrieve meaning through art, an attempt that is always, in some sense, incomplete? The lyre of Orpheus still sounds its mournful, beautiful notes down through the centuries, a haunting reminder of a love that dared to challenge death and the terrible price of looking back. You're left wondering about the shadows he encountered, the silent faces in the gloom, and the profound, perhaps unbearable knowledge he carried back into the sunlight, only to lose everything in a single fateful glance. Our long night's journey through terrifying Greek secrets is drawing towards its close. We've faced oracular fumes, forbidden rites, impossible machines, monstrous labyrinths, vanished armies, poison kings, ghostly invaders, silent discs, sunken cities, cursed families, brutal training, volcanic philosophers, lost languages, hellish fires, and harrowing descents into the underworld. For our final destination, we seek out places that were considered thresholds to that very chthonic realm, sacred caves and grottos, often associated with the wild, untamed god Pan or other earth deities, places rumored to be portals to other worlds or sites of dark, forgotten rituals. You can feel a cool, damp air emanating from the mouth of a shadowed cave, the scent of wet earth and something ancient, something that prickles the hairs on the back of your neck. Throughout ancient Greece, caves held a special, often numinous significance. They were natural openings into the earth, perceived as liminal spaces, connecting the world of the living with the mysterious powers dwelling beneath, the chthonic deities, spirits of the dead, and primal elemental forces. This is a mainstream historical fact. Many caves served as cult sites, often from prehistoric times, long before the Olympian gods rose to prominence in grand man-made temples. Places like the Carytian cave on Mount Parnassus, not far from Delphi, remember those fumes. The cave of Pan on the Acropolis in Athens, or the Idaean cave on Crete, reputed birthplace of Zeus, were all centers of ancient worship. You can almost picture early Greeks, torches flickering, venturing into these dark, echoing spaces, leaving offerings, seeking visions, or communing with the unseen. Pan, in particular, was a god intimately associated with wild, remote, and cavernous places. He was the god of shepherds, flocks, mountain wilds, rustic music. He played the panpipes, of course, and fertility, but also of sudden, inexplicable fear, panic terror, which he was said to inspire in those who disturbed his noonday nap or wandered into his sacred precincts. He was a hybrid figure, with the legs and horns of a goat and the torso of a man, embodying the untamed, instinctual, and sometimes frightening aspects of nature. Caves dedicated to Pan were often simple, unimproved grottos, perhaps with a rough altar or niches for offerings, terracotta figurines, pottery, or agricultural produce. You can imagine the hushed reverence, mixed with a frisson of fear, as a shepherd left a small token for the goat god, hoping for protection for his flock or a successful hunt. But what terrifying secrets might these caves hold, beyond their general association with the chthonic and the wild? Some were rumored to be actual entrances to the underworld, necromantians or oracles of the dead, where one could attempt to communicate with spirits. The most famous historical necromantion was at Ephora in Thesprotia, northwestern Greece, though it was more of a sunken, temple-like structure than a natural cave. However, many natural caves, with their deep, unexplored passages, Their disorienting darkness and the strange sounds that can echo within them could easily have been perceived as literal gateways to Hades. Imagine venturing deep into such a cave, the light of your torch barely pushing back the oppressive blackness, the silence broken only by the drip of water or the skittering of unseen creatures. It would be easy to believe you were crossing a threshold into another reality. Were some of these caves used for rites darker than simple offerings to Pan, perhaps for secret initiations, shamanistic journeys, or even forbidden necromantic rituals? Given the secrecy that often surrounded mystery cults like Eleusis and magical practices, it's plausible that remote caves would have been ideal locations for activities that needed to be hidden from public view or official sanction. The very atmosphere of a cave, cool, dark, silent, removed from the everyday world, lends itself to altered states of consciousness and a feeling of connection to the supernatural. Historians still argue about the extent and nature of black magic or purely malevolent cult practices in ancient Greece. While much of Greek religion was public and civic, there was always an undercurrent of more personal, sometimes illicit, magical belief. You could almost stumble upon a forgotten shrine deep within a cave, littered with strange offerings or unsettling symbols, hinting at rituals best left undisturbed. One specific type of cave of whispers relates to oracular sites. While Delphi had its chasm, other oracles might have been associated with caves where divine voices or sounds were thought to emanate. The sounds could be the wind whistling through crevices, water dripping in resonant chambers, or even seismic rumbles, all interpreted by priests or priestesses as messages from the gods or the earth itself. Plutarch, for instance, mentions that the sounds in the Carytian cave were believed to be the playful noises of Pan and the nymphs. But in a darker context, such ambiguous sounds could be interpreted as something more sinister, the groans of trapped spirits, the whispers of malevolent entities. It's a fine line between the sacred and the terrifying in such primal settings. A quirky tidbit for you. Some caves were associated with healing. The cave of Archidemos, the nympholept on Mount Hymettus near Athens, for example, was a small grotto elaborately carved by a man named Archidemos, who believed himself to be possessed or inspired by the nymphs. People would visit seeking cures or guidance. It shows the diverse range of beliefs and practices associated with these natural shrines, from rustic fertility rites to personal spiritual quests and healing rituals. Not all cave spirits were necessarily out to get you. Some were seen as benevolent, if somewhat unpredictable. But you'd probably still want to be on your best behavior. Don't anger the nymphs, dear. They'll turn you into a newt. Or worse, make you write bad poetry. The terrifying secret of Pan's caves and other sacred grottos might not be a single, solvable mystery, but rather the enduring power of these primal places to evoke a sense of dread and connection to the unknown. They represent the untamed edges of the human psyche and the natural world, places where the veil between realities feels thin. They remind us that for the ancient Greeks, the world was alive with spirits and forces beyond their complete understanding or control, many of them dwelling in the dark, hidden places of the earth. As you imagine yourself standing at the mouth of one such cave, the cool air breathing out its ancient secrets, you feel a primal pull. Do you enter and risk disturbing whatever powers reside within? Or do you stay in the familiar sunlight, content to leave some mysteries unexplored? These caves were the original temples, the first places where humans sought contact with the divine or the demonic. They are a reminder of a time when the earth itself was an object of worship and fear, its hidden depths holding promises of wisdom, terror, or perhaps a final silent oblivion. The whispers from Pan's cave are the whispers of our own deepest anxieties and oldest spiritual yearnings, echoing from a time when the world felt much larger and much more mysterious than it does today. The shadows of ancient Greece have danced before us, revealing glimpses of profound mysteries, unsettling truths, and questions that continue to echo through the ages. From the intoxicating fumes that shaped prophecies at Delphi, Through the solemn promise of an afterlife whispered in the darkened halls of Eleusis, to the unnerving ingenuity of the Antikythera mechanism, we've seen a world both remarkably advanced and deeply steeped in the inexplicable. We've tiptoed around the possible reality of the Minotaur's labyrinth, felt the chilling winds that might have swallowed Cambyses' vast army, and pondered the fatal illness or foul play that struck down Alexander in his prime. The ghostly onslaught of the Sea Peoples reshaped entire civilizations, while the silent, spiraling symbols of the Phaistos disk and the elegant script of Linear regard the lost voices of the Minoans. We've searched for the shimmering mirage of Atlantis, wondering if it was a true lost paradise or a philosopher's cautionary tale. The blood-soaked legacy of the House of Atreus reminded us of the terrifying power of curses and the cyclical nature of violence. We've shivered at the unspoken brutalities of the Spartan Agoge and marveled at Empedocles' legendary, perhaps staged, volcanic leap into Mount Etna's fiery maw. The secret formula of Greek fire burned brightly as a testament to lost military might, while Orpheus's mournful lyre led us to the very gates of the underworld, only to remind us of the unbearable pain of looking back too soon. Finally, we stood at the threshold of Pan's caves, feeling the ancient, chthonic power of the earth itself, sites of whispered oracles and perhaps darker, forgotten rituals. These secrets, these unsolved enigmas, are not just historical puzzles. They are windows into the ancient Greek soul, reflecting their fears, their ambitions, their deep desire to understand their world and their place within it, and their encounters with the terrifying unknown. As the last echoes of these tales fade, and the darkness in your room deepens, may these ancient whispers not disturb your rest too much. Let them instead be a gentle reminder of the vastness of history, the enduring power of mystery, and the fact that even in our modern, illuminated world, there are still shadows where fascinating secrets lie waiting. The ancient Greeks knew that some truths are best approached with caution, and some mysteries are perhaps meant to remain unsolved, forever tantalizing us from the quiet corners of the past. Sleep now, and may your dreams be peaceful, untroubled by minotaurs or vengeful furies. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye, and see you again in the next stories.